Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable, see playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. Web links. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 621, The Huge Tongue. Although the swallowing birds didn't have high intelligence, their instincts told them that there was a powerful monster ahead of them, so they decided to block the humans' way to stop them from approaching the monster. The dense flock of birds circled around the humans as they swooped down, forming a giant tornado. Fight! Fabian furrowed his brows deeply, thinking that he was really done for this time. In fact, there was a dramatic change in the expressions of most of the top-level warlords. A few of them were able to maintain their composure, but the rest of them were wearing a look of despair. Even if they risked their lives in this situation, it would be no use. They lost all hope. It was easy for a person to give up on fighting if he thought that there was no chance of winning. It's over. We're done for. It seems like we're going to die in the dark nether cave. We're so unlucky. We should have retreated to the Tower of Sin long ago. We shouldn't even have come to the dark nether cave in the first place. It's open every year, so why did we have to come here this year? Some of them began to grumble with an expression of regret on their faces. Zen's expression also darkened. Escaping from all the swallowing birds was going to be troublesome, even for him. However, he had never given up once in his life. Even in the face of certain death situations, he would still keep fighting. But now, the fighting spirit of the top-level warlords had completely dissipated. From the looks of it, all of them had given up on resisting. Zen shouted, "It's just a flock of birds. You're a group of top-level warlords and yet, you're so useless. So what if we die? Fight to the death or die like a coward, which one do you choose? Since we're going to die soon anyway, why don't we go all out?" As Zen roared these words at them, his body began to glow with killing intent. After communicating with the killing sword mountain, he began to unleash the surging malicious aura. Then, he swung his fists at the flock of birds swirling around them. Lavender and Yolanda hadn't said anything until now, but they didn't seem to want to give up either. Anyway, both Lavender and Yolanda were from the upper world and possessed the strength of supreme warriors. They would remain calm even while facing the adversity of death. Being able to calmly face death was the most ideal state of mind for a warrior. This didn't mean that they had to be unafraid of death. They just had to understand how to treat the possibility of death and adjust their mentality accordingly. The top-level warlords had given up, but after hearing Zen's words, they looked at him, Lavender, and Yolanda with a mixture of admiration and shame on their faces. These three juniors hadn't given up and yet they, top-level warlords, didn't have any morale at all. Now, many of them had a resolute expression on their faces. Zen was right. Since death was imminent, why not just go all out and fight? So when the over 1,000 birds drew closer, everyone began to display their unique skills. Bang, boom, crack, all sorts of attacks were unleashed into the sky. Flames, ice, lightning, fists, swords. These attacks actually managed to forcefully block the black mass of birds. Some of the birds were immediately riddled with holes and fell from the sky. Although their defensive capabilities were formidable, they still weren't able to withstand so many attacks at once. Unfortunately, there were simply too many strange birds. The warlords only blocked the birds for a short period of time, and then many strange birds dispersed the attacks from below and once again surged forward. We're really doomed this time. Let's fight to the death. Even if we're going to die, let's kill as many birds as we can. You're right, even if we die, we can't let these birds off that easily. Just as everyone got ready to fight with their lives on the line, they heard another croak. The next second, they saw a huge tongue popping out from a deep black pond some distance away. The tongue was over 1,000 feet wide. It stretched out and suddenly shot forward in their direction at the speed of lightning. In an instant, everyone saw a black shadow appear. It took them a moment to realize that the giant tongue was now almost above their heads. Compared to the huge tongue, the birds were as small as mosquitoes. Mucus was dripping down from the huge tongue. Even though everyone was standing a few dozen feet away from it, they could still sense the warm, rancid smell emitting from the tongue. Everyone, be careful of the mucus on the tongue. It's extremely poisonous, Fabian reminded them. However, just as he finished speaking, one of the top-level warlords was wrapped up by the viscous liquid that dripped from the tongue. The warlord didn't even have the time to scream before his entire body sizzled away into nothing. It was as if he had vanished in front of them. More importantly, the top-level warlord had been holding a low-grade sacred weapon in his hand, but it seemed that the weapon had melted away as well. The mucus was much more corrosive than they'd thought. Everyone's expression changed, including Zen's. Zen's body was a fairy weapon and was said to be immune to poison. But if this mucus could melt even a sacred weapon, his body wouldn't be able to withstand it. It was fortunate that the mucus was taking a long time to drip down. It wasn't difficult for them to avoid it as long as they stayed alert. The huge tongue kept rolling back and forth over everyone's head, catching the birds. A few moments later, most of the birds had been caught by the tongue. The remaining dozens of birds cried out and scattered in all directions. The birds that were firmly stuck to the tongue began to melt away in the mucus. Finally, the huge tongue withdrew. Zen looked in the direction of the tongue to see what creature it belonged to. The light in the dark nether cave was so weak that even top-level warlords weren't able to see what lay beyond a few meters. However, the green light in Zen's eyes flashed and his clear pupils allowed him to clearly see the scene in the darkness. He saw a deep black pond in the distance. In the middle of the pond, there was a giant toad. That's the bull-like giant toad. The body of the bull-like giant toad was almost the size of a mountain. However, most of its body was hidden beneath the water of the deep pool. Only a pair of eyes the size of a house could be seen, emitting two streaks of dark red light. After curling back its tongue, the bull-like giant toad let out a croak. And then, as if it felt that it wasn't enough, it let out another croak. The sound was so loud that it raised a big wave. At the same time, it spread toward Zen. Zen stood firmly and continued to stare at the toad. He watched as the bull-like giant toad stretched out its two thick forelimbs to leave the pool. It's coming over. Zen's heart tightened. At this time, the top-level warlords were still immersed in the joy and relief of surviving the onslaught of swallowing birds. They'd never imagined that they would be saved by a huge tongue that came out of nowhere. Although the tongue's mucus had corroded a top-level warlord, at least a majority of them had survived. However, Zen was staring straight ahead and standing still, as if he had been glued to the ground. All right, everyone, hurry up and leave this place. Although we haven't entered the territory of the bull-like giant toad, we're already very close. Fabian started saying in an extremely cautious tone. But before he could finish, Zen shouted, "Everyone, run! Run in all directions!" And with that, the power of the dragon scales within his body exploded forth. With the strength of both his legs, he shot up into the sky. When everyone heard Zen's warning and saw his swift escape, a strong sense of danger rose in their heart. The top-level warlords who had gathered there began dispersing in all directions. Just then, they saw the huge tongue shooting toward the spot where they had been standing just a moment ago. Bang! The huge tongue made an 80 feet wide crater in the ground. As for the mucus dripping from the tongue, it continuously corroded the ground, emitting sizzling sounds. Everyone's faces flashed with fear. For a moment, they all held their breaths. Then, the tongue started moving again. This time, it bounced up from the ground and shot toward Zen. Chapter 622, Run Away. Zen's expression changed drastically when he saw the huge tongue coming at him. Did this big toad know I saw it? Zen thought. However, there was no time for Zen to think whether the beast did or not. The others all successfully avoided the huge tongue thanks to Zen's warning. But when Fabian and Jared saw this scene, their faces instantly darkened. Zen was currently the most important figure in the Tower of Sin. Others could die, but Zen could never be hurt and must always be protected. Although Fabian didn't want to anger the bull-like giant toad anymore, he didn't have any other choice at the moment but to attack it. Zen, retreat, quickly. Immediately after shouting that, Fabian and Jared attacked the toad almost at the same time. The two of them worked closely together, and with their combined efforts, they were able to fight against a war sage. Two beams of sword radiance shot out from Fabian's and Jared's hands. First, the two energies circled around each other until they merged and became one, flying towards the large tongue. Since the tongue, which was coming at Zen at an extremely fast speed, was extremely large in size, it was impossible that their attack would miss its target. Boom! Although the two beams of intertwined sword radiance were comparable to an attack of a war sage, the big tongue remained unscathed when it hit it. It seemed like the attack felt more like an itchy spot for the tongue than a full-on attack, and so Fabian and Jared felt that their efforts were just huge failure. Dang it! Fabian screeched, frustrated by it. Seeing this scene, his and the others' hearts sank. No matter how great Zen's destiny was, no one would be able to save him under this dire situation. This was the Dark Nether Cave. It was under the Cursed Land, so there was no way a Soul Sea Realm Master would suddenly pop out and save Zen. Besides, it wouldn't help even if a Soul Sea Realm Master had come. Fabian assumed that even if Miguel came personally, he still wouldn't be a match for this toad. Facing the huge tongue which was approaching him swiftly, Zen's mind was rapidly spinning, trying to find a way out. If the mere saliva on it could dissolve a sacred weapon, there was no way that he would be able to defend himself against it. Also, even if his special body was able to keep him from being killed by the poisonous saliva, he would still surely face death if he was caught by the huge tongue and was swallowed by the bull-like giant toad. The expression of Lavender, who was floating beside Zen, darkened. With a deep breath, she lifted her long spear, waved it a little, and suddenly, an invisible wave of energy shot towards the huge tongue. At the same time, Yolanda, who was not far away, also began to move. She pointed at the tongue with her finger and a ray of light shot towards it as well. Boom, boom, the attacks of the two girls worked, especially after Lavender thrust out her spear, making it swirl in her hands. The invisible force that burst out from it constantly attacked the inner side of the big tongue, creating countless cuts on its side. These cuts covered an area as large as the size of a person. These cuts, however, were still very small when considering the huge size of the tongue. Because of that, none of the attacks managed to stop it from rushing towards Zen. Back, of course, Zen wouldn't just stand there and wait for death. The moment he saw the tongue still charging at him at full speed, he immediately retreated. However, he could see very clearly that the bull-like giant toad had already crawled out of the pitch-black pool. If he were to retreat, it would definitely follow him. So how would he be able to do a counterattack? Star shakes the earth. Zen immediately employed his strongest skill. It would be courting death if he still reserved his trump card at this point. Bam! Zen's punch created a star vortex in the air. It hit the tongue forcefully and left a huge dent on it. Unfortunately, like Lavender's attack, although it did cause damage to the tongue, it didn't hurt it too much. The tongue was too large in size and it was extremely difficult, bordering impossible, to destroy it completely. This was the first time that Zen's stellar body failed to kill his enemy. With that, he concluded that there were two reasons that had contributed to his failure. First, Zen had only cultivated the stellar body for a very short period of time, and second, his cultivation level was still too low. This bull-like giant toad wasn't something a warrior of his level could fight against. Perhaps, this was one of the reasons why this place was known as a forbidden land. Each year, more than half of the warriors who had gone into the Dark Nether Cave died, and this was only the death toll in the outer circle. The death rate for those who had successfully entered the inner circle was higher, and for those who were lucky enough to enter the core, the death rate was 100%, because no one had ever returned. What should I do? Zen thought to himself, backing at a lightning speed. He even jumped through space, hoping to distance himself from the huge tongue. But the speed of the tongue was obviously faster than his own. Flame, black flame, cyan dragon. Zen didn't have the time to waste and he directly roared at the cyan dragon in his head. The wisp of black flame wasn't big, but it was able to burn everything. Now, he could only give it a try. Under normal circumstances, Zen wouldn't use the black flame, especially when there were so many people around. However, it was the only plan of action he could think of at that time. He didn't want his body to be melted by this giant tongue and to become the giant toad's food. Swoosh! All of a sudden, a tiny wisp of flame shot out from the spot between Zen's eyebrows. The moment the flame appeared, it seemed to dance around in the air merrily. When Yolanda saw the wisp of black flame, her eyes widened. Her jaw dropped, and she looked like as if she was lost in thought. When Lavender saw the black flame, her face fell. As if it was on instinct, she turned to Yolanda. Although Lavender was attached to Zen's body, she had her own thoughts. She had seen this black flame before, but Yolanda, on the other hand, had never seen it before. It was obvious that Lavender didn't want Yolanda to notice the black flame. However, Zen was in a dire situation right now, and Lavender didn't have time to think more about this. Everyone saw a black flame emerge from the spot between Zen's brows. As if it had a soul of its own, the black flame directly charged towards the tongue despite Zen not giving it any kind of direction. Compared to the huge tongue, the black flame was insignificant. It looked like an ant against it. However, it instantly burrowed its way into the tongue. Since this wisp of flame was too small, the instant it disappeared into the tongue, it left no trace on the surface. The moment the black flame injected itself into the huge tongue, it started twisting violently, as if it was in great pain, temporarily halting its mission to catch Zen. Like a snake that had its head chopped off, the tongue wiggled crazily for no apparent reason. Luckily, the people around it had already distanced themselves from the tongue. Otherwise, if they were accidentally caught by the tongue, they would end up dead. Bang, 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 bang. The tongue repeatedly whipped the ground, creating a huge crater and sending dust and big pieces of rock into the air. With the loud noise, the tongue had alerted all the demonic beasts within several dozen miles. These demonic beasts, however, were nowhere near the strength and power of the giant toad, so every single one of them had deeply hidden themselves. In the outer circle of the dark nether cave, this giant toad was one of the most dangerous creatures and was on the top of the food chain. What exactly is that black flame? How is it making this bull-like giant toad suffer so much? I don't know. Who knows how many secrets this guy has? This toad is too stupid. Why didn't it just hold its tongue back? Do you think that the bull-like giant toad is dumber than you? The black flame is obviously still inside its tongue. Although I'm not sure what that black flame is, it seemed like it has inflicted the bull-like giant toad extreme pain. However, if that black flame doesn't come out of that tongue and the bull-like giant toad retracts it back to its mouth, wouldn't it mean that the black flame would burn in its mouth? The huge tongue was still twisting and pounding the ground, until suddenly, everyone saw its front part burst into flames. The tongue was on fire. And somehow, a 10-foot stretch starting from its tip had already completely burnt. The air reeked of its singed flesh, like that of roasted meat. Swoosh! Only then did the wisp of black flame come out of the toad's tongue. And the moment the black flame came out, the tongue rolled back, still wriggling as if it was fleeing in panic to avoid the black flame from burning again. As soon as the long tongue curled back, it instantly disappeared into the darkness not too far away. At this time, the black flame seemed to be very happy about its feet as it circled in the air and chirped merrily for a while before it returned back to the spot between Zen's eyebrows. Without any pause for rest, Zen looked at the toad that had already left the pond and shouted, "Let's hurry up and get away from here." The mountain-like toad lay prostrate in the darkness. Despite them being miles away from it, it would just take it a single leap to get to where they were. And if that happened, not one of them would be able to escape. Everyone looked at the direction Zen was gazing at, but they did not see anything. However, they did not ask Zen about what he had seen. It was simple for them to imagine. If the mere tongue of the bull-like giant toad was so horrible, they didn't need to see what would come next. And despite not being able to battle it fully, they knew that they would be no match for it. Since Zen had already burned a piece of the toad's tongue, it was more than wise for them to take the chance and run away. They would leave the giant toad be, and they had no plans, or nerve, for that matter, on taking it on again. Chapter 623, Zen's Goal. Everyone left the area as fast as they could. Even in the outer area of the dark nether cave, any place of great danger was an inescapable one. If any one of them was not careful enough, everyone would die there as a result. A faint green light flashed in Zen's eyes. Even if he was retreating, he was still extremely alert. Although the bull-like giant toad and its long tongue were proven to be very fast, Zen had quite a distance away from it, and he had plenty of room to either hide or dodge. However, if the giant toad were to pounce at him, he would be at his wit's end. Everyone would definitely die. Zen noticed that the toad had already left the huge pond. It had taken 2 steps forward but then stopped and became still. Its dark figure had blended into the darkness, but its 2 large eyes, which were about the size of a house, were gleaming, and they were staring coldly at him. Fortunately, Zen whispered, his breath labored. "It doesn't intend to chase us." As he continued to retreat, his eyes never left the toad in the darkness. After making sure that he was at a safe distance away from the huge monster, he finally turned around and followed the group. "Okay, where did that toad come from?" Lavender asked, turning to Yolanda who was by her side. Several warlords glanced at Lavender with confused looks, wondering why she was asking such a question. The giant toad had been in this cave for a long time, and its site had already been clearly marked on the map of the Dark Nether Cave. It was said that this toad had never moved out of the pond, and there were no stories as to how it got there. It just had always been there. The monsters in the Dark Nether Cave were all very complex and varied, and they were all usually strong enough to shake the world. If any powerful monster rushed out of the cursed land, it could bring a calamity to the sea god continent. Take this giant toad as an example, perhaps no one on the entire sea god continent would be able to deal with it. It was fortunate that although the Dark Nether Cave was full of powerful monsters, none of them had ever stepped out of the cave so far. No one knew what the real reason was, but most people speculated that these creatures were afraid of the cursed land and didn't dare to walk out of the Dark Nether Cave's domain. However, this conjecture was quickly proven to be false. The Dark Nether Cave was underground, so these monsters could easily dig a passageway and come out to another part of the sea god continent. But then again, none of these powerful monsters had done such a thing. Obviously, it was not that easy to figure out the truth of the Dark Nether Cave. It's the bull-like giant toad, one of Richard's spirit beasts, Yolanda answered directly. Richard's, Lavender repeated, slightly surprised. The man who nearly became a world lord. Yes, but he's dead now, Yolanda said flatly. Although the conversation between the two was brief, everyone understood what they were talking about. And it didn't matter if they didn't. They now knew that the giant toad could be tamed as a spirit beast, and there were actually some people among them who were proficient enough in capturing beasts. But then, a question remained, would they be able to capture a spirit beast of a man who was powerful enough to be a world lord? That would be equivalent to courting death. Everyone followed Fabian and kept retreating until they finally returned to their normal route. Many of the people's faces were still as pale as a sheet of paper. Jared counted the number of people. After being chased by those strange birds, out of over 100 human warriors, only less than 50 survived, while a dozen top-level warlords had also been killed. In a terrible situation like this, it was fortunate enough that they were not annihilated completely. Why don't we just return to the tower? A top-level warlord suggested. He was not afraid of death. Once before, he had entered the Dark Nether Cave, but he had never encountered such a great danger. Because of this, he felt that there must have been some sort of change that happened within the Dark Nether Cave, and it led him to his suggestion. The moment other warlords and war generals heard him, they overwhelmingly agreed to his suggestion. I agree. The monsters in Dark Nether Cave have been acting too actively this year. I feel that something is amiss. Just to be on the safe side, I think we better leave. The Dark Nether Cave opens every year anyway. We can wait for that and just enter again. I don't want to stay in this place any longer. I heard that anyone who enters the Dark Nether Cave has a slim chance of surviving. But in my opinion, it's a 100% chance of dying. As everyone joined in the discussion, Fabian and Jared slowly nodded in approval. This trip to Dark Nether Cave was indeed unlucky, coming in and immediately encountering such a huge crisis. To be safe, it was better to give the mission up and return to the Tower of Sin. However, they were not the one who would make the final decision. Fabian looked at Zen. He was the one who had a say in the whole thing. When Zen felt Fabian's gaze on him, a faint smile graced his lips. If you guys intend to go back, of course I won't have any objections. But I won't go with you. I will stay here. Lavender stayed quiet, but her calm gaze and red pupils that seemed to have faint flames circulating within seemed to convey that she would be staying with Zen. Yolanda then broke the silence and said, I will not leave Zen's side. With him, I also intend to explore the Dark Nether Cave. When he heard Zen's response, Fabian quickly knew that it would be a difficult decision for him to make. To put it bluntly, all of the top-level warlords here including Fabian himself weren't as important as Zen alone. The Purple Heart Sacred Place was actually relying on Zen to control the Tower of Sin. Even if all of the top-level warlords they were with died in this cave, the Purple Heart Sacred Place would be able to train more top-level warlords in the future, so they basically were unimportant characters. However, without Zen, the status of the human race would be restored to their former position. The reason why the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place of the Demon Knight race had allied with the Purple Heart Sacred Place was also because of Zen's sword spirit, Lavender. To put it bluntly, it was still for Zen's sake. After all, there was no need for a 7th grade sacred place to ally with the Purple Heart Sacred Place, which just qualified to be regarded as a 6th grade sacred place. Fabian was not the only one to think of such things. Many other top-level warlords had the same thoughts. However, they were also aware how difficult it would be to further explore the cave. The dark nether cave is too dangerous to be in this time. I suspect that the tide of chaos has broken out. Why don't we make the wiser choice and just retreat this time? Fabian wasn't ready to give up. In his mind, he knew that he would be able to persuade Zen to go back. Tide of chaos? Zen asked doubtfully. Yes, but that is just my speculation. It is said that the tide of chaos would erupt in this cave once every 10 years, and when the tide of chaos breaks out, the monsters in the dark nether cave would become much more active, and the degree of danger of the place would greatly increase. Whenever those years roll by, we normally cancel our explorations, Fabian explained as he stared at Zen. His words were a reminder to Zen of the dangers of the dark nether cave. You can't ask so many humans to die with you, right? Fabian thought to himself. However, Zen was thinking about a totally different thing. After the run-in they had with the giant toad just now, the dangers of the cave were already crystal clear to Zen. But he didn't have much time left. He had been in this continent for close to a year. The more time passed, the more worried he would be. If Zen were to miss this opportunity, he would have to wait for another full year. If that ever happened, he would most likely become a warlord, or even a top-level warlord. If he had such strength as he entered the dark nether cave, it would be much safer for him, and for everyone he was with. But then, a year's time was more than enough for there to be too many crucial variables in the central region. I'm sorry. Although I know that this place is very dangerous, I really can't wait for another year, Zen apologetically said, while shaking his head and staring at Fabian. His eyes were brimming with determination. Fabian let out a deep sigh. After all, there was no reason for him to leave Zen alone in the dark nether cave. If he did and Zen survived, it would be okay. But if Zen was unable to return to the Tower of Sin, Fabian would undoubtedly be the first one to be punished by the Purple Heart sacred place. But then, considering how so many of the people they were with were already set on leaving the area, he couldn't bring himself to say that they needed to stay. Eventually, he opened his mouth and announced the decision. Jared, he said slowly, taking a deep breath. You and I will stay here with Zen. The rest of you, he continued, his eyes sweeping everyone that was with them. You can retreat and wait for us in the Tower of Sin. Jared did not hesitate and nodded in approval. He understood Fabian's thoughts immediately, and very well. With that, all of the other top-level warlords let out a sigh of relief. Their expressions were also as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their hearts. Many of them did not want to stay in the cursed place for even a second longer. It wasn't difficult to return via the same route as they had come, as they had only gone a few dozen miles after being chased by the swallowing birds. It wouldn't take long for an expert of their level to close the distance. After the top-level warlords left with the war generals, Fabian turned to Zen and said, well, now that we have chosen to stay, we will accompany you as far as possible. Zen, the thing that you want to obtain after entering this dark nether cave must truly be something extraordinary. Hidden in the dark nether cave were immeasurable treasures and endless good fortune. Even the people who had only reached the outer layer had been able to enjoy it. Although the treasures in the outer layer had been decreasing in number after so many years of people scavenging for them, there were still people who had been lucky enough to find precious objects during their ventures. I don't know, Zen answered vaguely. You don't know? A strange expression appeared on Fabian's face. Then do you at least have a goal? Maybe. If possible, I would like to enter the core area of the dark nether cave, Zen said. As these words came out of Zen's mouth, Fabian's and Jared's faces were instantly colored with disbelief. What is this kid even thinking? Entering the core area of the dark nether cave? Crazy. Chapter 624, Black Nether Bead. The outer area of the dark nether cave had always been dangerous to anyone who dared to delve into its depths. Zen was well aware that a lot of people who once entered never made it out. Both Fabian and Jared didn't have the intention of going inside the cave from the beginning. It was far too dangerous and the chances of getting out alive were slim. It took an intensive and advanced preparation for the warriors to be all set for their entry into the inner area of the cave. However, years of preparation didn't mean a guarantee. A lot of warriors, most of the top-level warlords, had faced their demise in the said cave. It was also believed that numerous resources could be found in the inner layer. Those who were lucky enough to return brought with them enormous gifts from the cave. That was why countless warriors took the risk. While the others aimed for the inner layer of the cave, Zen, being the confident warrior, wanted to go into the core area. That part of the cave was a totally different story. None of the few who dared explore that particular area was able to return. It was basically a death trap. As written on the map, the outer layer of the cave was marked with a lot of threatening areas. The inner layer had lesser. The depths of the cave was somewhat still a mystery. For whatever it was worth, not a single soul had lived to tell stories about it. As for the core of the cave, the map had almost nothing to offer the seekers of wealth. It was completely blank, apart from vague directions, and had no markings of any sort. Not that it needed to be marked, as everyone knew it was deadly. "Zen, are you joking?" Fabian uttered, looking at Zen with a deep concern written all over his face. Zen chuckled and responded, "Just take it as a joke if you will." When Mist passed the token to Zen and asked him to obtain the inheritance, he wasn't able to explain the matter clearly. Having not entered the cave yet, Mist didn't exactly have all the information with regards to the whereabouts of the inheritance. All he knew was that it was somewhere inside the cave. Mist told Zen that the jade butterfly would light up when he was closer to the item. Despite his carefree attitude, Zen was not of the reckless sort. He knew all too well that he was risking his life. At that moment, the jade butterfly stayed still. Deciding that he'd explore the outer layer of the cave first, Zen would enter the inner layer next if the inheritance was still nowhere to be found. Knowing that the core area of the cave was extremely dangerous, Zen was cautious with his every move. If he still wasn't able to get a hold of the inheritance in the core area, he'd leave. Being able to get his hands on the inheritance was his priority, as it was very essential for the human race. Realizing that he might not be able to obtain it considering his current strength, he'd stop at once. It was too much of a risk. When he heard Zen's answer, Fabian let out a sigh of relief. Zen still had some sense in him. Smiling to himself, he said, "If that's the case, then let's keep following the original route." Including Lavender, there were only 5 warriors walking side by side. It was a good thing. Any kind of noise wasn't good at all. Luckily, they weren't welcomed by danger while walking around the outer layer of the dark nether cave. As they went deeper into the cave, the air suddenly shifted. At the same time, the once dim red light began to grow stronger. The dark nether death light that had weakened still had some might left in it. Any ordinary human without any cultivation base could have easily been fatally pierced through by that light. As the red light grew stronger, a thin layer of life vitality protection appeared on Fabian's, Jared's, and Yolanda's bodies. It was to withstand the red light's assault. Zen didn't employ his forceful energy, as he had his weapon-like body to protect himself. The red light could not make him feel uncomfortable. Meanwhile, as the sword spirit, Lavender was unable to feel any pain. As they kept moving forward for about an hour, the sound of a battle nearby could be heard. Then, 6 figures appeared from the bushes. 2 of them who held longbows in their hands began to shoot some arrows towards the jungle. A black ghost claw emerged from the jungle, grabbing the 2 archers and throwing them in the air. Unable to escape, the warriors died almost instantly. "Leave, hurry, I'll cover you," a woman behind them said. Among the other warriors, she showed greater strength. The unknown warrior lady suddenly released the endless light that produced colors and flowers that quickly enveloped the place. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, countless of colorful petals began appearing. All of them grew only to fly towards the ghost claw. In just a split second, the murderous claw was covered entirely with petals. "Explode," the woman shouted. Bang! Upon such an explosion, the claw's speed slowed down. However, the remaining 4 warriors charged towards Zen and his group immediately. Their eyes were all focused on Zen. However, upon seeing Lavender, one of them calmly said, "My queen, this place is deadly. You must leave now. Come with us." Zen surmised that they were all from the Demon Knight. Including Esther, they were top-level warlords. "Let's go." Not saying much, the rest just followed suit. The ghost claw wasn't weaker than the bull-like giant toad. Thanks to Esther, they managed to escape. After all, Esther was the top warrior at the Tower of Sin. Even Maurice was no match to her strength. "So, there are only 4 members of the Demon Knight left?" Fabian asked, his face glinting with astonishment. At the Tower of Sin, the Demon Knight had more seats than the humans. When they entered the cave, there were a few dozens more of them as compared to humans. How come only 4 of them were able to make it? Tide of chaos is waiting. I realized that it was too much of a risk. I decided to dismiss some of the troops and ask them to retreat, Esther responded. Figured. Fabian nodded. I also allowed them to return to the tower. Just as they all began moving to escape, the Demon Knight members started to kneel down before Lavender to show their undying respect. "There is no time. You don't have to do that now. This place is dangerous," she said flatly. "Why didn't you guys go back in the first place?" Fabian asked. "The tide of chaos has already broken out and the risk increases, but the chances might also come sooner than we have all expected," Esther replied. It was the ultimate truth. Despite terrifyingly dangerous, the opportunities grew. The arrival of the tide of chaos at that moment drove other vicious monsters away to other places. During that particular time, most warriors had the chance to explore some more. However, the dangers were also greater than before. Due to her outstanding cultivation, Esther dared to enter such places. Earlier, Esther, along with a few Demon Knight members, had obtained several black nether beads. The said beads were of paramount importance, each of them equal to a middle-grade sacred weapon. Obtaining them, Esther had paid quite a heavy price. 2 top-level warlords of the Demon Knight had perished. "My queen, these 2 black nether beads were obtained by us. Please accept them." Esther respectfully walked up to Lavender and presented the 2 beads to her. Reaching the highest level of cultivation, Lavender's soul, even just one of the many, was abnormally strong. The small part of her soul was still far stronger than many warriors from the lower world. For that reason, it was almost impossible to nourish her soul some more. All the pills and techniques for nourishment had no effect on her at all. Even if Lavender entered the heavenly feather sacred place and absorbed the life power of the entire holy tree, changes would be slight. Labeled as treasures from the upper world, the black nether beads were used to repair damaged souls. Lavender knew that she could put those items into good use. Nodding her head to Esther's gesture, she let Zen keep the beads for her. It was the greatest of all honors for Esther and the rest of the Demon Knight members that Lavender accepted her offer. The black nether beads could come in handy if Esther needed them, but they were absolutely not as important as Lavender. Chapter 625, The War Sage Malcolm. It was unavoidable that Fabian and the others felt envious of Lavender when Esther gave the black nether beads to her. However, since Lavender was the queen of Demon Knight, their jealousy was pretty much displaced. While Zen put away the 2 black nether beads in his space ring, Esther knelt down in front of Lavender. "My queen, the tide of chaos in the dark nether cave will make this place extremely dangerous. Please return to the Tower of Sin." Esther had originally wanted to tell her queen that everything they would obtain in the dark nether cave would be offered to her. But now, she restrained herself from doing so. Fabian would have no doubt already warned Zen about the tide of chaos and must have also tried to persuade him to return. The fact that Zen was still here made it obvious that both he and Lavender insisted to stay. It was the second time someone had tried to persuade Lavender to return to the Tower of Sin. Though it was for her own good, as well as for Zen's good, Lavender's face still darkened in displeasure from Esther's words. Lavender knew that Zen was definitely not going to give up such a good chance to explore the dark nether cave. Since he was the one who had made it possible for her to regain her throne, she felt immensely displeased upon hearing Esther's words that could effectively dampen the young man's enthusiasm. "I won't go back," Lavender stated coldly. The queen's coldness made Esther's heart tremble. Knowing that her advice had been deemed useless, she immediately stood up. "Since that is the case, I humbly beg you to allow us to stay and explore the dark nether cave with you." "That is a good suggestion," Fabian exclaimed with great joy. Esther, after all, was the most powerful top-level warlord in the Tower of Sin. Back on the 10th floor, Esther's name had managed to climb all the way up to the 4th row on the talent tablet. Now, with the strength of a top-level warlord, she was probably not much weaker than any common war sage. Fabian would feel more assured if she joined their party. Several days ago, Zen's decision to follow the human warlords into the dark nether cave had worried Esther greatly. She had even gone as far as to invite Zen to follow the Demon Knight instead. Lavender was still a sword spirit who relied on Zen's body to exist. If Zen died, so would Lavender. In the end, everything was all for the Demon Knight Queen. Unfortunately, her offer was immediately turned down by Zen. Now, with the threat of great danger looming overhead, Esther had chosen to stay by Lavender's side to protect her. Both Esther and Fabian hurriedly took out their maps with the intent of choosing a relatively easy route to explore. Yolanda stood idle on the side while the two put their heads together to strategize. Suddenly though, her relaxed pose stiffened as she quickly turned around and pointed her slender finger into the darkness. Whoosh, bam, 4 people walked out from the forest and the one leading them wore an embarrassed smile on his face. Esther's expression turned cold. Night group. Esther, One of them greeted sheepishly. How have you been? The Night group was a powerful group. Their eternal night sacred place ranked 5th in the entire Sea God continent and was considered a backbone of the 6th grade sacred places. However, they had always been a vassal force of the Ogre group and did not really have a say in major decisions in the tower. While they were deemed a quiet and under-the-radar group, the removal of the Ogres from the Tower of Sin greatly changed their dynamic. The race that they had always been attached to was suddenly driven out of the Tower of Sin, which meant the safety net they had all thought would protect them was immediately removed. The result was a disastrous decline of their status in the Tower of Sin. The members of the Night group were all born assassins. All of them were incredibly skilled in the art of deceit, concealment, and striking their opponents when they least expected it. The 4 top-level warlords of the Night group were living testaments of their strength. They had all hidden themselves so well, and even Esther failed to notice them. Esther casually glanced at Yolanda. The girl's sense of perception could be higher than Esther's, yet she was only a 10th-level war general. She really was a mystery. However, no matter how good they were at hiding themselves, the Night group was terrible when it came to face-to-face combat. Shane Shui, Esther glared as her body began to emit a colorful, mysterious ethereal light. Are you here to try to kill Zen? Her stance told them she was ready to attack, and rightly so. The Night group had always been the Ogre race's ally and had been intentionally trained to assassinate those that caused trouble for the Ogres in the Tower of Sin. Shane Shui was a seat owner and one of the strongest among the Night group. Esther's intimidating pose had him hurriedly waving his hand in front of her. No. No, you have mistaken me. It's actually the opposite, he quickly clarified. The tide of chaos is ravaging the dark nether cave. We actually wanted to join you. Esther sneered, do you even think you're qualified to go with us? Her remark caused Shane Shui and his companions to go red in the face. The 4 of them were also top-level warlords, the same as Esther, so why would they be unqualified? However, Esther's reputation made them keep their mouths shut. Their strength lay in the shadows and not in direct confrontation. Fabian suddenly butted in. I want to say something, he said, raising his hand. With the situation we're all currently in, I don't think it's a bad choice to cooperate. Fabian saw the advantage of allying with the Night group. A race dedicated to honing themselves as assassins were no doubt good at hiding themselves from the many dangers that abounded in the dark nether cave. He didn't like them one bit, but there was no need to make things difficult for themselves. Besides, they currently had the upper hand, and even if the Night group tried anything against Zen, they would have Esther to deal with them. Fabian also had no doubt that Zen was more than capable of taking care of himself and could actually be on par with his own strength. There were only 4 top-level warlords in the Night group, and they were not much of a threat should they decide to betray them halfway. Shane Shui laughed. Fabian is right. Although our Night group isn't strong, we have our talents that could benefit you. Esther visibly hesitated. She immediately weighed the pros and cons before coming up with a decision. In the end, Esther figured that she had absolute confidence in her own strength, and keeping a few Night group members as backup wasn't too bad. She agreed to Fabian's proposal with a nod. Soon enough, a temporary team was formed. They all got together to discuss their next moves and were able to work out a new route. Not long after, they were able to set out to explore once again. At the same time, on the other side of the Tower of Sin, 2 burly figures hid in a secret passageway. Their size and build immediately identified them as the 2 top-level warlords of the Ogre race, Malcolm and Rihan. Before the Ogres withdrew from the Tower of Sin, Boyd and Rihan had been ordered to lurk inside the secret passageway. However, due to Malcolm's request, they replaced Boyd and let him take his place. The failure of killing Zen weighed heavily on Malcolm's shoulders and made him feel extremely depressed. His troubles were so great that the frustration alone was enough to make his warrior spirit waver. However, the negative emotions actually worked to his advantage. His frustrations effectively increased his motivation, and he had managed a breakthrough in such a short period of time. Malcolm was now a first-level war sage. Rihan, on the other hand, was still a top-level warlord. Although most of the seat owners of the Tower of Sin suppressed their cultivation level, in truth, it wasn't easy for them to break through and become a war sage. Moreover, Malcolm had experienced a life-and-death crisis on his ascension. The secret passageway was large enough to fit a couple of humans or demon knight members, but it was too small for the ogres. Dealing with a life-and-death crisis in such a narrow space was extremely agonizing, and Malcolm almost didn't make it. However, in the end, he managed to push through. Rihan hadn't broken through yet, but Malcolm's current strength would be enough for them to kill Zen. Shane has sent news, Rihan reported. They've found Zen. Malcolm nodded at this new information and said, okay. Previously, Malcolm had ranked lower than Rihan, but his recent breakthrough had switched their positions. I've been stuck in this place for months. Now, I can finally leave, Malcolm said as he came out of the other side and went into the dark nether cave. Rihan followed closely behind him. I really wonder how Colin and Neil got through this, he said as he stretched out his body. That place is suffocating. Malcolm grunted, let's go. The humans are able to play in the tower for a few months, but it's time for us ogres to take everything back, he said, cracking his knuckles. It's time to eliminate Zen. As the controller of the Tower of Sin, Zen had no doubt become a star. The ogres couldn't really directly confront him. However, they couldn't just sit idly by. They had a plan. Now that Zen ventured outside the confines of the tower and into the dark nether cave, they would now be able to stand a chance against him. Malcolm's recent breakthrough was also a plus. So long as they killed Zen, the ogres would be able to return and take back their glory. When that happened, all the seats that were taken from them by the humans and the demon knight shall be returned rightfully to them. No matter what, none of the other races could cultivate a war sage in the Tower of Sin, but the ogres could. Chapter 626, Scrambling for a Plant. The dark nether cave was illuminated by the dark nether death light all year round. To be able to grow under such harsh conditions, creatures that reproduced there must be stronger than those creatures outside the cave. It was an endless battle for the survival of the fittest. The grass surrounding some areas of the cave seemed to have a unique way of existing on the grounds. After being stomped on by countless footsteps, they immediately swayed back like nothing happened. They even had blade-like leaves, almost as if to defend themselves from other creatures' attacks. The grass leaves were thin enough to cut an ordinary mysterious weapon. If one wasn't careful enough, they could cause serious injuries. If ordinary and powerless creatures graced through these grasses, they could die. They could bleed to death even before they managed to get out. This sort of danger didn't alarm the top-level warlords. The harm that the grass could cause could never penetrate through their protective life vitality. Gracefully moving forward, Esther led the way. Following right behind her was Zen and the others. A few of the night group members hid their breaths and swiftly moved around like ghosts. What we see right before us is the Bloody Pass. Everyone, please remove all of your life vitality and forceful energy and do not make any sound, Esther said softly. The Bloody Pass. From afar, Zen was able to make out two small mountains, forming a specific angle. A path could be seen between them, which was the so-called Bloody Pass. It baffled them all, however, why they had to take off their protection techniques. There are two powerful monster layers on the two sides of the Bloody Pass. One is the azure wolf, and the other is the swallowing bird, the strange bird we saw before. While passing through, we must completely be silent. Even the sound of our breaths can put us in danger, Fabian said, after which he took out a cloak from his space ring and covered himself with it. Despite the inability to understand the entire point of such action, the rest of the party did the same and then covered themselves with their cloaks. Unlike Zen, everyone else didn't have the capability to resist the effects of the red light. The dark nether death light had indeed weakened, but its power could cause extreme discomfort to the victim. Not being able to avoid it would be like being pricked by 1,000 needles. The cloaks were certainly essential as they could block the light. When they knew they were all ready, all of them held their breaths and began walking forward. A deafening silence embraced the surroundings. The four top-level warlords from the night group moved like the wind. None of them made any sound at all. The other warlords, as well as Esther, kept moving slowly. As they got closer to the Bloody Pass, they became more alert. From a distance, faint sounds coming from the swallowing birds could be heard. This meant that there was a large flock of those beasts resting somewhere not too far from where they were. On the other side of the Bloody Pass, a wolf howled. The atmosphere grew darker and heavier by the minute. Although Zen had never seen any azure wolf before, he reckoned that it was definitely no weaker than a swallowing bird. It didn't even matter what kind of creature they encountered. They knew they had to stay vigilant at all times. Holding their breaths, everyone moved at a careful pace. It was so quiet that only the beating of their hearts was audible. Lucky for them, the Bloody Pass wasn't as vast as the others. If they successfully walked through it, they were safe. They moved cautiously for about 5 minutes more. Just walking on a few more steps, they could arrive at the exit point. We made it, Fabian sighed when almost reaching the end of the pass. The rest sighed in relief, almost in unison. They all looked at each other as if checking if anyone was harmed in any way. In just a matter of seconds, all of them began to notice a faint light right before them. Some were curious, while the others were somehow threatened. The light continued to flicker. As it did, their curiosity also rose. Deciding to follow the light, Zen carefully made his way. Upon reaching a certain point, he saw a peculiar plant. The palm-sized plant had 3 leaves that extended in 3 different directions. A bunch of hairy stamens from one of the stems emitted a faint, orange glow. It was quite beautiful. Could this be the moon shadow begonia? Excitement replaced their fear and curiosity. However, greed was painted all over the expressions of the night group members. All of them hurriedly walked towards the plant. Considered as one of the rarest herbs in the dark nether cave, the moon shadow begonia was said to broaden the pubic region of one's body, which was very beneficial for the warriors who intended to reach the Soul Sea realm. Back then, only 3 moon shadow begonias were found in the cave. They were taken by 3 warriors, who had successfully become the masters of the Soul Sea realm. As the supreme master of the Sea God continent, Amber had taken one of the 3 moon shadow begonias. Through the power of the moon shadow begonia, Amber had easily become the strongest warrior throughout the Soul Sea realm. The magical plant had the ability to increase a warrior's strength to an unbelievable limit. After the warrior's pubic region was enlarged, the amount of life vitality would increase as well, making cultivation methods easier to perform. Fixated on the plant, Esther waved her hand to the top-level warlords from the night group. "Don't touch it," she said in a very low voice, calmly. She wasn't so sure if they heard her, so she kept on waving her hand. The moon shadow begonia grew on the territory of the Azure Wolf. The night group warriors' hiding skills were not to be trampled with, but picking the flower meant exposing all of them to danger. At that time, Esther was unable to communicate with others clearly with her life vitality. They were close to the swallowing birds and Azure Wolf's homes, and activating their life vitality could alert the beasts. Unfortunately for Esther, her fellow night group warlords didn't intend on listening to her pleas. Both Fabian's and Jared's faces were now covered in sweat. One wrong move could cost them everything that they had gone through for this specific journey. Not to mention the sleeping beasts that knew no mercy. "Lavender," Zen called softly, glancing at his sword spirit. As a sword spirit, Lavender had some skills that were like that of Zen. They both didn't need to circulate their life vitality to resist the dark nether death light. In addition, she was able to fly. Her sword spirit body belonged to Zen. Thus, when she flew, she did not consume her life vitality. Understanding what Zen's glance meant, Lavender floated towards the moon shadow begonia like an entity without legs. They all knew of her capacity but were still in awe. Even though Lavender's actions could possibly alert the monsters nearby, Zen wanted her to pick the plant first, before the greedy members of the night group could get to them. Regardless, they were eventually going to face these monsters anyway. It was a consequence Zen had accepted. The night group warlords each made their way to the plant while Lavender was able to get to it in just one quick move. Seeing through Lavender's intentions of picking up the plant first, each of them muttered under their breaths. Surprised and displeased, they could only watch Lavender do the deed. It was no secret what the moon shadow begonia had to offer, so they believed that putting their lives at risk was going to be worth it in the end. Anger filled all of them as they watched Lavender tower over the plant before they even had the chance to touch it. The sword spirit ignored the angry warriors surrounding her. Her moves were so quick and accurate that the tip of her long spear was able to obtain the plant in just a blink of an eye. A cold smile played on her face. Victory. Turning her back against them, she flew over to Zen. It angered all the 4 top-level night group warlords. One of them, making sure to speak in a low voice, said, "Give it back." "What makes you think you have the right to take it?" Lavender retorted, lowering her voice as well. "If you don't hand it back, we will call out for the Azure Wolves." One of the rage-filled warlords of the night group exclaimed, grinding his teeth. As the Demon Night Queen, Lavender was not affected by the others' threats. "Do it then, if you dare." Possessing such strength and magic, Lavender refused to give in. Meanwhile, Esther and Fabian were starting to get annoyed. Those shady night group members should have not been there in the first place. They were all so well behaved earlier. Now, they were acting like a bunch of animals fighting over a piece of meat. Staring at the tip of Lavender's spear, one of the warlords noticed that the moon shadow begonia still released a glow. This caused the warrior to charge directly towards Lavender, not caring about the other dangers of the mountains anymore. Catch this, Lavender shook her long spear and tossed the plant to Zen. She began to rotate her weapon in her hands. Without looking, she was able to stab the figure behind her. Even if Zen were to fight that warlord, he wouldn't stand a chance. As for Lavender, she did it without even taking a glance. It was a precise strike. Realizing that he was stabbed, the top-level warlord of the Night Group trembled in disbelief. How could he not have dodged that attack? As he fell down, this particular warlord let out a piercing cry. Some of it was out of pain, and some was to spite the beasts. Hearing the sounds he was making, everyone was paralyzed with fear. Chapter 627, The Purgatory Fire Snake. The air was tense. Everyone moved slowly and did not even dare to breathe too loudly as they crossed the bloody pass. There were two kinds of monsters that lived on each side of the bloody pass. They did not get in the way of each other and normally would not cross the border. It was because of these two kinds of monsters that crossing the bloody pass was extremely dangerous, but as long as people paid attention, it would be all right. This was not the first time Fabian and Esther came to this place. The two of them had crossed the bloody pass many times unscathed because neither of them was stupid enough to alert the monsters that lived there. Of course, that was the case with them. It was more difficult to cross safely when you had a couple of idiots with you such as the members of the Night Group. If we can return to the Tower of Sin, we will expel the entire Night Group. Esther vowed through gritted teeth. Run faster. Zen hadn't expelled the Night Group from the tower though he knew it would be a piece of cake since they had lost the ogre's protection. It was primarily due to the fact that Zen did not want to risk offending other races and end up giving the ogres more allies. Nonetheless, it couldn't be denied that the Night Group was in a very precarious situation in the Tower of Sin. The crowd did not have any time to think about anything else as they ran across the bloody pass. Only the top-level warlord of the Night Group that had been attacked by Lavender remained as he trembled on the ground. His eyes were filled with confusion. Why did that woman dare to make a move? Was she not afraid of catching the attention of the monsters? The top-level warlords of the Night Group were all up to no good and had secretly informed Malcolm of Zen's position. The plan was for the ogres to eliminate Zen and turn the tides around. As long as the ogres regained their control of the tower, then the Night Group would surely get a share of the benefits. Of course, that was the main goal while fishing up benefits in the Dark Nether Cave was a secondary initiative. The Moon Shadow Begonia was an excellent opportunity and they did not really think that these guys would actually dare to start a fight in such a place. He had not expected that the woman armed with the long spear would actually kill him so suddenly without even considering the severity of the matter. He wasn't normally that weak since he was a top-level warlord of the Night Group that was famous for his top-notch body movements. Lavender just really took him by surprise. The moment he screamed, a wolf's howl quickly followed and it did not sound that far away. Howl. Green shadows constantly moved about in the forest as a large number of monsters began to charge. On the other side of the bloody pass, strange cackling sounds could be heard as the swallowing birds also began to make their moves. Soon enough, a giant cloud had formed in the sky. Zen looked up and was secretly surprised at the amount of birds all flying together to form a black mass. They numbered at around 4,000 to 5,000. Let's go, Zen yelled. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. More than 10 beams of light shot towards the bloody pass. Esther was extremely pissed and it didn't help that the Night Group's remaining top-level warlords continued following her. Idiot off, she screamed at them. A strange light began to glow in Esther's hands as resplendent flowers bloomed one after another. Their petals were quickly blown by the wind and floated towards the warlords of the Night Group. The petals of these flowers were deadly and, if any of them stuck to a person's skin, it was potentially fatal. No matter how powerful Esther was, it would be impossible for her to simultaneously eliminate 3 top-level warlords. The petals she used were to only stop them from following her. As long as they were faster than the Night Group, they'd be safe. The Night Group's top-level warlords all wore bitter expressions on their faces. Had they known that this group would be so reckless, then they wouldn't have gone to get the Moon Shadow Begonia. Despite their speed and dexterity, Esther's flower petals were extremely hard to dodge and they ended up having to slow down. Everyone but them was able to rush through the bloody pass. Esther's flower petals really did their job of slowing them down while both the swallowing birds and azure wolves inched ever so closer towards them. Esther hoped that the lives of these top-level warlords would be enough to fend off the monsters. Whoever survived would die at her hands. They knew the tide of chaos was brewing in the Dark Nether Cave, but these top-level warlords were too confident of themselves and stayed. Like the demon knight and the humans, the knight group had also ordered their clansmen to return to the Tower of Sin once they got word of the eruption of the tide of chaos. The 4 top-level warlords chose to remain and were met with tragedy. One was killed by Lavender while the 3 others were encircled by monsters and now had to fight for their lives. They had their own ways of getting around. As the birds swooped in from the sky and the wolves came charging like the tide, all 3 of them used their life vitality and transformed into black smoke that slowly drifted about. The knight group's hiding skill is remarkable, Zen said. There was really nothing the monsters could do once the warlords transformed themselves into smoke. However, there was still their sharp sense of smell. They knew very well that 3 people hid themselves in the smoke and so all they needed to do was follow the scent. The 3 top-level warlords moved very slowly after transformation. Nevertheless, they had no choice. It was turning into smoke or dying. That hiding skill consumes a great deal of life vitality, Esther said coldly. They won't be able to hold on for too long. They're doomed to die and they deserve it. Fabian shook his head with regret. We're in great trouble now. A portion of the azure wolves and swallowing birds had lost interest in the wisps of smoke and were now once again charging towards their group. Everyone did not dare to slow down. They could only run as fast as they could in hopes of shaking off the monsters. Dang it, why don't these wolves and birds just fight each other? Jared grumbled gloomily. Disputes were normal among different kinds of monsters, but it was just their luck that these 2 actually coexisted peacefully. 2 forks diverged the path ahead. Normally, most people would choose the left path. However, they stopped when they noticed that 2 red snakes coiled at the corner of the road. 2 fiery snakes, one male and one female, were intertwined and constantly twisted and coiled around each other. They were reproducing. Zen didn't think too much when he saw the snakes. They weren't too big and could not even be called pythons. In his eyes, they were just ordinary reptiles. However, Esther and Fabian did not share his sentiments. Holy garbage, we're doomed, what should we do? The 2 of them shouted at the same time. What's wrong? Zen asked curiously. Purgatory fire snake. They're the most powerful monsters in the inner area. Why are they here in the outer area now? 17 top-level warlords of the giants were killed in an instant by these 2 little snakes. Only one of them had been able to escape by using a secret technique to preserve his soul. Though the dark nether cave was usually chaotic when the tide of chaos broke out, the monsters in the inner area would rarely come out to the outer area. Though the inner and outer areas were not separated by that much distance, the monsters that resided in the inner area never ventured out of their domain. It was just some kind of unspoken rule. It had always been that way, which was the reason why many top-level warlords dared to enter the dark nether cave and even brought some war generals along for the experience. They were now faced with a big problem. The difference in strength between the monsters of the outer and inner areas was tremendous. Just how would they be able to push forward with the strongest monsters of the inner area standing in the way? Zen's expression darkened at their words. He did not expect that 2 little snakes would be so fearsome. Is there another way? He asked, pointing at the path to his right. No way. Both Esther and Fabian protested at the same time. Zen raised an eyebrow. But why? That's the way towards the inner area. Chapter 628. Zen's decision. The outbreak of the tide of chaos this time was an opportunity for Esther. However, the route she had planned was for the outer area of Dark Nether Cave. She wanted to explore new places that she thought would lead to great opportunities. Those places were originally inaccessible, but then, a path opened to these places after the tide of chaos arrived. On the other hand, Fabian had the same thoughts. Even without the tide of chaos, being fully prepared to enter the inner area wasn't even something to think about at all, for the chances of survival in the inner area were simply too low. The danger level inside it even went worse now that the tide of chaos arrived. No one dared to enter the inner area nowadays. Then let's enter the inner area, Zen said in a serious tone, blinking his eyes. Entering the inner area now is courting death, Fabian replied. Zen looked at the dense mass of monsters behind them and then gazed at the 2 purgatory fire snakes that were coiling not far away. He shrugged his shoulders and said, staying here is courting death too. That made everyone upset. Only the strange women, Lavender and Yolanda, were able to retain their calm expressions. Zen was actually right. Behind them was an overwhelming number of swallowing birds and azure wolves. There was no doubt that these monsters could tear them to shreds. The 2 purgatory fire snakes there didn't look as powerful as the birds and wolves. However, it was also clear to Esther and Fabian that passing through those 2 snakes would not be safe. Nonetheless, they had no choice. "Let's enter the inner area," Esther immediately said in a stern voice after hesitating for a while. All of the top-level warlords present had grown up from killing and were very decisive at critical situations. Moreover, making a choice at this moment wasn't even that hard. There was no other safer choice but to enter the inner area. Escaping would be futile for them if they delayed their decisions any longer. The moment Esther's voice faded, everyone chose the right path and sprinted forward. The swallowing birds and azure wolves were getting closer and closer to them. "Speed up," all of them sprinted towards the inner area with all their might. "They are coming," someone exclaimed in terror. The thousands of swallowing birds were now hovering over them and began diving sharply. One of the warlords of Demon Knight was drowned out by the swallowing birds and his miserable cries instantly stopped. The scene magnified everyone's terror to the extent that their hairs stood. They sped up their paces as much as they could. "We can't do this. I don't think we'll be able to break into the inner area," Fabian complained. "We are so close. Let's charge in the inner area in one go," Esther screamed back determinedly. Her eyes were focused on whatever was before her. There was a dividing line ahead of them and everyone could still make out what was outside that line. However, the area beyond that line looked gray. It was as if the whole world beyond that barrier was eaten by gray. The group of swallowing birds and azure wolves were rushing behind them again after feasting on the top-level warlord. The closest flock from them was only 20 to 30 feet away. "Hurry, we'll be safe once we rush in. Go for it," everyone encouraged each other. The black flock of swallowing birds swooped down and finally hovered over everyone. Some of them even opened their mouths and started devouring Zen and the others. Immediate death awaited everyone since being caught by these birds would mean no survival. "Go to perdition." As Zen sprinted forward, he spun and released the black flame in his forehead. It had been a long time since he had used his black flame. After all, he hadn't encountered anything as dangerous as this. He just ran out of choices. It was actually against his will to use his black flame and reveal it to the others. The wisp of black flame circled Zen and then shot up into the sky. Whoosh, whoosh, just like that, the wisp of black flame lightly flared up and instantly pierced through several dozens of swallowing birds. The birds, miserable shrieks echoed in the whole place. He killed at least 50 to 60 swallowing birds in an instant. Fabian and Jared had already witnessed the might of Zen's black fire. Even the tongue of the bull-like giant toad couldn't withstand the burning of the black flame, let alone these swallowing birds. On the other hand, all the other top-level warlords of the Demon Knight and Esther were left with horrified expressions. What was this black flame? It was too fierce. Although the swallowing birds were afraid of fire, a normal fire wouldn't be enough to destroy them even if it stayed burning for 2 hours. It was a shock to everyone that the birds showed no resistance against Zen's black flame at all. They just instantly burned to nothingness at the slightest contact. It was with that action that Zen succeeded to create some leeway for everyone. Unfortunately, the space between them and the monsters wasn't that big. More so, these monsters weren't that smart too. Although they saw their companions killed, none of them understood the danger and still rushed to get closer to their prey, filling the distance between them in an instant. It was a miss by second. None of the birds was able to catch anyone since everyone had already passed through the dividing line successfully. Quack, 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 quack. The swallowing birds surged like a tidal wave against the dividing line but then ended up rolling back when they neared the line. These birds didn't dare enter that inner area again. Just like the swallowing birds, the azure wolves rushed to the side of the line and stopped in their tracks. Their eyes flickered dangerously as they stared at the group of creatures across the line. Some wolves howled as if they felt pity for Zen and the others running away. Zen stood in the gray area and turned his head to look at the monsters. He was gasping for air. Not only him, but even Esther, Fabian, and all the other top-level warlords were also heaving. The sprint they did almost took the best of them. Everyone rested for a while. The azure wolves and swallowing birds remained to block the path with no signs of leaving soon. "We will wait here. I don't believe that these monsters will stay here forever." Jared sat down. He guessed that these monsters would eventually get tired of waiting. They could leave the inner area after the monsters left. Fabian and Esther also agreed with this plan. It was safer to stay on that spot than to enter the inner area any further. However, just as Zen stepped into the inner area, he suddenly felt the space ring on his chest begin to heat up. Curious, he tried to check what was going on with his space ring. He poured his consciousness to it. But then he was suddenly startled by what he saw. A small butterfly was hovering around inside his space ring. It was beautiful, but it was blazing in flames. What's going on? Of course, Zen recognized it. This was the jade butterfly that Immortal Mist had given to him. According to Immortal Mist, with this jade butterfly, Zen would be able to obtain the incomparably important inheritance in the Dark Nether Cave. He had been in the Dark Nether Cave for such a long time, and all this while, this butterfly just remained staying there quietly with no reaction. It was only after he got into this place that the jade butterfly moved and worse, flared. From the looks of it, it seemed that the inheritance Immortal Mist had talked about was here in this place, the inner area. Fabian and the others were planning to stay there. They had decided to go back through the same route they used to come in. Obviously, none of them had any intention of exploring the inner area. Zen actually agreed with their judgment. There was nothing more valuable for a warrior than his life after all. Everything would be nonsense if they lost their lives. Nonetheless, he had never expected the jade butterfly to react to this place. Thus, he had no choice but to reconsider his thoughts. He was compelled to explore the inner area. Logically speaking, it wasn't a problem if Zen would enter the Dark Nether Cave again next year. A year should be enough for him to become a top-level warlord. His stellar body would have probably matured by that time. More so, with the power of the transcendent divine might, he might even be able to fight against a war sage. He would be more confident about entering the Dark Nether Cave by then. It was just that Zen knew that he didn't have much time left. You guys stay here. Zen shot a glance at Esther and Fabian. I want to continue exploring the inner area. With a flick of her spear, Lavender silently followed behind Zen. Yolanda also followed them without saying a word. On the other hand, Fabian and Esther were instantly worried about what they heard. They quickly sprinted before Zen and blocked him. Zen, no matter what, I won't let you continue to barge in. Fabian said firmly. Esther then knelt on one knee and said to Lavender, Queen, please think twice. Chapter 629, The Life-Saving Straw. Even if the tide of chaos had not erupted, Fabian and Esther would still have gone all out to stop them. However, with the outbreak of the tide of chaos, everything in the inner circle had now changed. They were sure to die if they recklessly entered the inner circle now. Seeing Fabian stand in his way, Zen looked on helplessly. Fabian was not Zen and he did not understand what he was thinking. Moreover, Zen had no intention of sharing his secret with anyone. Please get out of my way, I have something very important to do, Zen said calmly. Jared also barred Zen's way to stop him. Zen, you're very important to our Purple Heart sacred place. We simply can't let you go forward any further. You will die. Really? A faint smile appeared on Zen's face. But what if I have more important things to do? Do you mean that I should give up on myself just because I am important to your Purple Heart sacred place? Zen looked intently at them until they had to look away shamefaced. Why would you have to give up on yourself? Jared asked in puzzlement. Zen shook his head, as there was no way in which he could explain, and said, I don't need you to come with me. I'll go by myself. Lavender also looked questioningly at Esther, who was kneeling on the ground. She lowered her head and asked, What are you doing? My queen, the inner circle is not a place you can safely enter now. You'd better stay here and wait for the demonic beasts to retreat, and then we can leave here, Esther said as she lowered her head. Lavender was the supreme queen in Esther's heart. Technically, Lavender was very powerful and there was no need for Esther to worry about her safety. However, Esther also understood that something had been happening to the demon knight in the upper world, because Lavender's statue had begun to lose its luster and had become dark and dim. In other words, the sword spirit in front of her was Lavender's final soul fragment. If Zen were to die, this soul fragment would also vanish into thin air, and in the end, their queen would die. This was something that Esther would never want to see. I don't need you to make decisions for me, Lavender said coldly to Esther, regaining her commanding demeanor. Esther gritted her teeth. She was fully aware that she had no right to persuade or lecture Lavender, who was her queen. Even Amber, the leader of the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place, was not qualified to do so, much less Esther, who was inferior to Amber. Since you have made up your mind, I will follow you inside. Esther said seriously. At the same time, the top-level warlords of the Demon Knight next to Esther also knelt down. There was a resolute expression on their faces. They were all well aware that they would probably die if they entered the inner circle of the Dark Nether Cave at this time, with the tide of chaos raging, but they still chose to follow their queen. They would follow her into hell itself if needed be. Fabian and Jared became even more depressed as they saw the actions of the Demon Knight warlords. If these warlords of the Demon Knight followed Zen and entered the inner circle, then the two of them would be left here alone. After thinking for a moment, Fabian held his head in his hands and said, "Okay, I still don't think that you should go, but we too shall brave the inner area with you." Sometimes, decisions had to be made through hard way. Moreover, the demonic beasts in the outer circle didn't have any intention of leaving. If these demonic beasts didn't leave, then they would be stuck here with no way to return. In the end, the team formed up and began to advance towards the inner circle. Though trepidation filled their steps, they marched on with forceful steps. Shortly after Zen and the others had left, near the Bloody Pass, 3 columns of smoke unfurled off into the opposite direction. The 3 members of the night group possessed quite a few unique skills. They dematerialized into smoke and circled in the air. However, they were slowly moving towards the outside of the Bloody Pass. It cost them a lot of life vitality to utilize such a technique of evasion. But, every time, once they had only 30% of their life vitality left, the 3 of them would suddenly rematerialize on the ground underneath the beaks of the swallowing birds and the sharp claws of the azure wolves. They would then rapidly dash forward for some distance. During this process, they would take out life vitality crystals to replenish their own life vitality. After they had replenished their life vitality, they once again turned into columns of smoke, repeating the same process over and over again. Unfortunately, although they were able to survive for the time being using this technique, the demonic beasts were still lingering around them. They were still in a dangerous situation with the demonic beasts circling around them every time they materialized. Moving in this way was proving extremely inefficient. It would be almost impossible for them to reach the Tower of Sin in such a tedious way. Even if they wanted to continue like this, there was not enough time for them. Furthermore, the life vitality crystals were far from enough to sustain their escape method. Though they had a great number of supreme life vitality crystals with them, these would be used up eventually. Every time that they used one, then there would be one less left. Just in a short period of time, each of them had used up half of their life vitality crystals in order to cover a small distance indeed. If this continued, then it wouldn't be long before they were left stranded and would be swallowed up by these beasts. "What should we do, brother?" one of the night group top-level warlords asked as they traveled in their temporary incorporeal forms. "How would I know? Who is going to lure these demonic beasts away?" In the thick smoke, the 3 constantly used some of their life vitality to communicate with each other. Just as the 3 of them were panicking, 2 rays of bright light suddenly appeared, coming from the path they were traveling along. One was black and the other red. When the rays of light came closer, they could see that they were 2 mountain-like figures. The 3 of them were stunned for a moment. Then, one of the night group top-level warlords said, I think we could be saved." "It's Malcolm. They are coming," the other night group top-level warlords also exclaimed. "Haven't the ogres already been expelled from the Tower of Sin? They really can enter the dark nether cave." The ogres hadn't shared their secrets concerning the secret passageway under the Tower of Sin with the night group. It was impossible for them to share such an important secret with other races, even if the night group was their vassal. In fact, in order to achieve their secret goal, the ogre race had only issued an order to Shane, asking him to report back to Malcolm through message rune as soon as he discovered Zen's whereabouts in the dark nether cave. Receiving the order, Shane had been puzzled for a long time. He had thought that the ogres would give him an order to assassinate Zen. He hadn't expected that what he would receive was an order that simply required him to report on Zen's movements to Malcolm. After all, what was the use of reporting Zen's movements to Malcolm? Could it be that Malcolm could actually enter the dark nether cave by some other means? Or was Malcolm hiding in the dark nether cave all this time? These questions had puzzled Shane for a long time. But since the ogres gave the order, he had to obey. Although the ogres couldn't currently enter the Tower of Sin, the night group's Eternal Night Sacred Place was still a vassal of the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. He hadn't expected that not long after he secretly used his message rune to send the message, Malcolm and Rihan would actually rush into the dark nether cave. Malcolm's cultivation seems to be he has become a war sage," they exclaimed as they stared at the approaching figures. "Oh my goodness, the ogres must have grasped the other secrets of the Tower of Sin." Colin and Neil had once suddenly appeared in the Tower of Sin as 2 war sages, and now Malcolm has also become a war sage. At this moment, the 3 top-level warlords of the night group seemed to have found a silver lining in the clouds which had plagued their minds regarding a way to escape. Obviously, the more advanced Malcolm's cultivation had become, the more it benefited them. However, although some of the azure wolves and the swallowing birds had retreated at the approaching beams of light, the three of them still found that there were many demonic beasts surrounding them. Malcolm had broken through to become a war sage, but even a war sage was surely unable to deal with so many demonic beasts. Although they were still quite worried, there was now hope for them to survive with someone more powerful helping them. They would not let the chance slip by. Malcolm. Originally, Malcolm had been a seat owner, the same as these top-level warlords of the Night Group. However, now that Malcolm was a war sage, the three of them immediately became respectful and addressed him almost reverently. As their voices, carried by life vitality force, were sent to ring out in Malcolm's ears, Malcolm narrowed his eyes and looked forward. He saw immediately that there were 3 pillars of smoke which were densely surrounded by a large number of beasts. The 3 dematerialized smoke columns moved slowly, and numerous demonic beasts also followed closely behind them. "It's Shane," Rihan said indifferently. "Should we go to save them?" Malcolm furrowed his eyebrows as he considered the dense cluster of demonic beasts. Malcolm had a great advantage in this place since he had broken through and became a war sage. Despite this, he was still very cautious. In the dark nether cave, even a mighty warrior of the Soul Sea realm would have to tread very cautiously. One wrong step would mean death. Moreover, Malcolm was only a first-level war sage. There were many ferocious demonic beasts gathered below, and it would be quite troublesome for Malcolm to deal with them. The outcome of such a confrontation would not be certain. "Where is Zen?" Malcolm stopped, hovering in the air as he asked Shane through his life vitality. Shane was looking pleadingly up at Malcolm, hoping that he could save them. Seeing that he had suddenly stopped there, but made no move, he immediately realized that Malcolm did not plan to save the 3 of them. Shane quickly sent a message to Malcolm though his life vitality, "They have rushed into the inner circle. But I have left markers on their bodies, so that we can track them." Of course, Shane wouldn't simply tell Malcolm where Zen was. If he did, he would then have nothing with which to convince Malcolm to save him. "This old fox, he doesn't want to tell us." Rihan laughed sinisterly. Malcolm shook his head and said, "It is only survival instinct. Shane thinks that we are his life-saving straw. So he will not easily let us go. If we want to know where Zen is, then these 3 must be saved. Take out the flame-controlling scale that the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place has given us." Rihan nodded and immediately took out a small golden scale. The ogre race had dominated the Tower of Sin for a long time, so they were more familiar with the dark nether cave than the other races. The flame-controlling scale was a mighty weapon and might be potent enough to deal with the assembled demonic beasts. Chapter 630, The Crying. The swallowing birds and the azure wolves were the most common monsters ever living in the dark nether cave. In addition, there were also other monsters such as the black agouti, a fearsome rodent-sized beast which could gnaw a warrior to death in mere moments. They were only some of the demonic beasts living in the bottom level of the cave. In the very beginning, the ogres had controlled the entire Tower of Sin. Although other races were allowed to visit the top of the tower occasionally, they were strictly prohibited from entering the dark nether cave. The ogres had acquired many different types of resources from the dark nether cave, and used them to gain glories on the Sea God continent. If it weren't for Amber's astonishing talent, no one on the Sea God continent would have been able to confront the ogres. However, the ogres had also sacrificed a lot in their explorations of the cave. As a result, they had developed many methods, such as the flame-controlling scale, to cope with the swallowing birds and the azure wolves. The flame-controlling scale was only a medium-grade sacred weapon and not very effective in defending its owner from enemy attacks. However, when the ogres had realized that the swallowing birds and the azure wolves were afraid of flames, they had asked their weapon refiners to forge this weapon. Rihan held the flame-controlling scale in his hand, and a trace of forceful energy was applied into one end of the scale. Instantly, light blue flames crackled and shot forth from the other side of the scale, and a few moments later half of the sky was shrouded in flames. The swallowing birds quacked madly, though a note of panic had entered their avian voices. At the same time, the azure wolves' howls had turned into yelps of fear. When the beasts saw the light blue flames, they grew nervous and slacked in their attacks. "Go, go, go!" At Malcolm's order, Rihan held the flame-controlling scale in his hand and transformed himself into a streak of light, flying towards the crowd of demonic creatures. The light blue flames followed Rihan's path and spread forward quickly. He now resembled a comet streaking right at the monsters. The swallowing birds quacked nervously. As the flames approached, the birds seemed to have seen their mortal nemesis. In the chaos, they scattered in all directions. At the same time, the azure wolves that had surrounded the 3 members of the night group also retreated quickly with deep whimpering sounds. With the flame-controlling scale, Rihan could easily dispel their enemies. Looking at the 3 columns of smoke, Rihan grinned fiendishly, "You can come out now, Shane." As the smoke dissipated, the figures of Shane and the other 2 top-level warlords slowly appeared. "Rihan, thank you." Before Shane had finished speaking, Rihan's big fist had already planted a massive blow against his jaw. The night group did not excel at fist fighting. Even though Shane ranked slightly higher than Rihan, he was still unable to dodge the martial blow. After being punched, Shane flew backwards, just like a kite which had broken away from its string. When Shane got up, his face was covered in a mask of blood. "You think you're very smart," Rihan sneered. Shane stood up shakily and wiped some of the blood from the corner of his mouth. He then said, "There's nothing I could do. I had to do this just to live." Both Rihan and Malcolm didn't like being used by others. However, they'd had no other choice but to rescue Shane, because he was perhaps the only person who knew Zen's whereabouts. Malcolm slowly hovered above them. He cast a cold glance at Shane and demanded sharply, "Where is Zen?" If Shane couldn't give him a satisfying answer, Malcolm would probably kill the 3 warlords from the night group without any hesitation. However, it was true that Shane had hidden the night group's special tracking rune on Zen's body. This device could avoid detection and cause no discomfort in the person who was marked. Shane nodded carefully. "Zen has already entered the inner area." "The inner area?" Malcolm frowned. After the tide of chaos came, even Malcolm, as a war sage, was unwilling to wander inside the inner area. However, Malcolm clearly knew his mission took precedence over his own personal fears. The ogres from the Tower of Sin had already suffered a crushing defeat. Now, he was the only hope for them to turn the tables. Zen had brazenly entered the inner area. Even though he was in the core area right now, Malcolm would follow him inside as long as Zen hadn't been killed already. "If that's the case, then take us there," Malcolm said lightly. But, Shane wanted to reject such a dangerous instruction. They were attacked by so many monsters only a few moments ago and he was almost frightened to death. Now, he and the other warlords wished that they could grow a pair of wings on their backs and leave the dark nether cave as soon as possible. However, Malcolm's fierce eyes pinned him to the spot, and he fell silent. Malcolm's formidable aura told him that if he dared to refuse, he would be killed instantly. "It's better to take the risk of leading them inside the inner area than to die here," Shane thought to himself. He then nodded obediently and answered, "Okay, I'll lead the way." "Good, behave yourself and you might live," said Malcolm while diffusing some of his killing aura. Rihan raised the flame-controlling scale in one hand and fell into step behind Shane, who led them towards the bloody pass. Malcolm and his companions could now walk forward confidently and boldly. They pushed their way through the raging flames. The swallowing birds and the azure wolves were hiding somewhere near the bloody pass, but none of those monsters dared to come out and confront them. The blue flames were too frightening for them and they skulked around the edges, but didn't dare approach. Zen had no clue that he was being hunted by his enemies. At this moment, he was leading the group in exploring the inner area. Zen didn't need a map. Besides, Fabian's and Esther's maps had become useless. The map had some errors, and many of the races who had contributed to drawing it did not have much understanding of the inner area. Although there had been many top-level warlords who had entered the inner area of the Dark Nether Cave, most of them had been slaughtered there. Perhaps they had encountered some great dangers or even found some interesting treasures. But none of them had returned from the cave alive, hence they could not make any contributions to drawing the map. The only thing Zen could rely on to get his bearings was the jade butterfly which was stored in his space ring. After exploring for quite a period of time, Zen finally understood that when he walked towards the correct direction, the jade butterfly would violently burn in the Sumeru space. However, if he moved towards the wrong direction, the burning would become weaker. This was what Zen used to guide his route and decide what was the right direction to travel in. Strangely, the group did not encounter any real danger while exploring the inner area during this lengthy time. But their good turn of luck didn't relieve their worries. Instead, it made everyone become even more vigilant. Danger would surely pounce if they relaxed their vigilance. "This is too quiet and strange," Jared said with a vigilant but nervous look on his face. Esther nodded her agreement since she had also noticed that something was wrong. It was not the first time that Esther had entered the inner area. She had come here 3 years ago. Although there weren't so many low-level monsters in the inner area back then, the place had several ominous and extremely formidable monsters on her previous exploration. Esther had almost died here 3 years ago, so she held a very deeply negative impression of the inner area. With the outbreak of the tide of chaos, those monsters should have been more restless and they should have attacked anybody who dared to enter their territories. But today, the entire area was deathly silent, and the silence was unnerving. This sinister silence is really annoying. Fabian clenched his teeth, trying to restrain his urge to scream. Although he knew that making too much noise in the inner area was unwise and suicidal, the eerie silence there was also very depressing. It felt as if something was just about to go wrong, and the sensation did not go away. Just as everyone was following Zen inside, he suddenly stopped, and cocked his ears as he asked, "Did anyone hear something?" "Hear what?" a top-level demon knight warlord asked nervously. "Sobbing. The crying of a woman," Zen said calmly. "No." Fabian felt the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. "Zen, don't be so suspicious." Jared also shook his head. "Zen, stop scaring me. Dang, I'd rather fight against those monsters than wander around in this gloomy place." However, Yolanda nodded, blinked her pale eyes and said, "I heard it too." "Really, you heard that?" Fabian was dumbfounded. Esther's facial expression became increasingly solemn, and from her slender fingers she released a stream of life vitality, which then poured into her ears. Suddenly, Esther's expression changed and she said in a whisper, "I heard it too." "What is it?" Fabian asked fearfully. "I don't know." Although Esther entered the inner area 3 years ago, she had never heard of such a sound before. "It doesn't matter what it is. We shouldn't linger here any longer. Let's go," Jared said with a trembling tone of voice. Meanwhile, the crying sounds had suddenly become louder. Now everyone could hear it. A voice that sounded like the weeping of a grieving woman came from behind them. That cry seemed to be filled with grievances and it was whispering something terribly wrong at them. Chapter 631, Stopping Fabian. The terrifying voice sent a chill down the warriors' spines. The warriors couldn't help but want to turn around. They didn't want to turn their backs to their enemy, and this was the only thing in their minds. However, just as they were about to turn around, Yolanda looked on straight ahead, saying coldly, "Don't turn your heads around. Those who do will die." Hearing Yolanda's warning, Zen, who was about to look over his shoulder, immediately turned to look forward. Esther, Fabian, Jared, and the others did not turn around either, but one of the top-level warlords of the Demon Knight had already whirled to get a glimpse of the thing behind them. Even though the rest of them did not turn their heads, they could see the expression on the top-level warlord's face. The warlord's eyes widened, unflinching, as if he had seen something inconceivable. Astonishment was written all over his face. The warlord wanted to scream, but when he opened his mouth, he found he couldn't do so. Only a faint noise escaped his throat. Top-level warlords were creatures that had progressed through every stage of their lives and encountered possible deaths. What had these creatures not seen before? They had seen countless corpses and killed a great number of beings. They had defeated and killed numerous warriors before they could become the powerful warlords that they were. However, in that instant, this particular top-level warlord looked scared out of his wits. A low whine left his mouth, and very quickly, a strange smile appeared on his face. His eyes started to look glassy, losing their vibrance. Crack! All too soon, a crack could be seen on the warlord's forehead. It progressively extended downward and very soon, his entire face, as well as the rest of his body, was covered in cracks. He looked like a piece of broken, glazed tile. Then his body collapsed with a loud sound, the clothes he wore still neat and undamaged. Watching the warlord keel over, Fabian grew frightened and helpless. "What is it behind us?" Zen frowned deeply, the creases of his eyes contracting with caution. His mind was stable and strong, but he still felt he was under a lot of pressure. "I don't know. Yolanda, what should we do now?" Zen asked her. "Don't look back. Don't turn around, no matter what happens," Yolanda whispered in a warning, seemingly immersed in a strange state. Even without Yolanda's warning, no one would have dared to turn around now. The top-level warlord of the Demon Knight was not weak. Indeed, he was much stronger than Fabian and Jared. Still, he had turned around and died horrifyingly, so how could the rest of them have the guts to look back? Lavender did not turn. She stared straight ahead, her brows scrunching together as if she was mulling over something. She was not afraid of any ferocious ghost. Being so powerful, she was able to reach the river of the netherworld and come back. In her eyes, no evil creature was invincible. She only pondered over which one stood behind them and how to defeat it. Who? In the beginning, the cry sounded from far away, but as time passed, it grew closer and closer to them. At the same time, Zen saw a faint beam of light glowing from behind him. That thing is getting closer, Fabian said with a tremble. He was a brave and dignified top-level warlord. If someone had cut open his stomach, he might not have been so scared as he felt right now. At the moment, his entire body was shaking like a leaf. What is that thing? Yolanda, if you know, please tell me. Jared pleaded. Yolanda's eyes looked glazed over, like she was still engrossed in an otherworldly, meditative state. Still, she kept repeating, "Don't look back. Don't turn around." From the corner of their eyes, they could see the light creeping closer to them. The wailing noise grew louder and louder, now sounding as if it was just about 10 feet behind them. That terrible thing is here, Fabian kept repeating, gasping with fear. He had stopped trembling, for now the muscles in his body had stiffened. Esther also grew increasingly nervous. Her fingertips compressed a ball of life vitality severely. Although she knew that she couldn't turn around, she couldn't give up so easily. Her warrior spirit was also very stable. She would do her best to fight the evil spirit behind them even if she wasn't a match for it. The light grew brighter and the sound resonated in the atmosphere. Suddenly, a number of slender and long tentacles reached out from somewhere behind their backs and attacked them. The tentacles seemed tangible, but they were in fact made up of a faint yellow light. They were weightless, and as soon as they touched the faces, necks, and arms of the warriors, it felt like a thin veil had swept over them. "Ah, I can't stand it. I'm going to kill it," Fabian roared, his eyes bloodshot. In the face of this unprecedented and terrifying encounter, Fabian was on the verge of collapse. His actions were a bit out of control. It was a grim sight. If he continued doing that, Fabian would die without a doubt. Resolving to fight the unknown creature behind him, he moved to turn around. Anticipating the danger of it, a sharp, thin thorn zoomed out of Zen's eyebrow and shot toward Fabian, who was at Zen's left in the front. Spiritual thorn. How perceptive was Zen's soul? Fabian was in a poor mental state and lacked any defensive measures to protect himself. Zen's spiritual thorn successfully pierced through him. Ah! Fabian, who was just about to turn around, let out a blood-curdling screech, covering his head as he fell to his knees. Esther was shocked to see it. The soul attack that Zen had just performed was nothing special to speak of, but she did not underestimate it, however simple it was. Zen's soul, which had just employed the spiritual thorn, was not so simple. It glowed with a faint jasper color, which meant that it was about to step into the jasper fighting soul realm. So Zen's soul was at the fighting soul realm. It was no wonder that Esther was surprised. Among the top-level warlords, not one soul had stepped into the fighting soul realm. Even in the case of the war sages, there were only a few warriors' souls that currently belonged to the fighting soul realm. But how could Zen, who was only a 9th-level war general, have already made his soul enter the fighting soul realm? His soul emitted a faint green light. It was obvious that it wasn't long before it entered the Jasper fighting soul realm. This was truly incredible. Zen had indeed done much to astonish Esther. Perhaps it was time she stopped being so taken aback even though he did something extraordinary. Zen's spiritual thorn had saved Fabian's life as it stopped the latter from turning around. Fabian, still kneeling on the ground, hugged his head as he screamed. He didn't get the chance to turn his head and look at the thing behind him. Suddenly, Yolanda seemed to slowly come to her senses. Biting her lip, she said, "That thing is coming over. It's going to be in front of us." "What should we do?" Jared asked in a hurry. "Run," Yolanda said shortly. "Where do we run?" Esther asked. "Run ahead. Just remember, don't turn around," Yolanda said, pursing her lips. "When do we run?" Zen asked as he looked sideways at the tentacles continuously encircling him. "Now, let's go." Before she could even finish speaking, Yolanda had rushed forward. At the same time, Jared, Esther, and the other top-level warlords ran after her. The moment Zen took to his heels, he darted toward Fabian. Reaching out to grab Fabian's collar, he intended to drag him along. Fabian's soul had been pierced by Zen. All he felt was a sharp pain and was unable to acknowledge the situation he was in. Zen couldn't just leave him alone here to die. Fortunately, he was strong enough to take Fabian along with him. As they ran, the sound behind them suddenly turned shrill. "Who?" They could hear the thing following them and moving rather quickly. Everyone had calmed down a bit by now. They thought that as long as they didn't turn around, they wouldn't die miserable deaths. However, if they continued to run like this, how could they rid themselves of that thing? What should we do now, Yolanda? Zen shouted over. Yolanda was 10 feet above the ground and sprinting wholeheartedly. Wait for me to handle it. She replied back. How long do we have to wait? Esther asked her. Yolanda just said, I don't know. Chapter 632, The Gate of Samsara. After that, Yolanda extended her slender fingers, which were pure white like green onions. Her 10 fingers continuously danced through the air, and her life vitality was constantly pulled forth, forming one rune after another. Those are divine textures. As Zen looked at the runes forming in her hands, his eyebrows suddenly shot up. He recognized them. These runes were extremely similar to those the Cyan dragon had taught him. Divine textures aren't unique only to the genuine dragon world. Humans can have extremely high attainments in divine textures as well, the Cyan dragon replied plainly. What on earth is she doing? Zen asked the Cyan dragon. The Cyan dragon had also noticed the runes in Yolanda's hands. He said, if I'm not mistaken, she wants to seal that thing. Seal it. Zen's eyes flickered at this. Yolanda continued inscribing divine textures using her life vitality and her nimble fingers only. Would the divine textures work? Ho ho, the origin of the divine textures is even more complex than you can imagine. If you advance into the upper world in the future, you will naturally be able to explore these things, the Cyan dragon replied. As the number of runes in Yolanda's hands increased, the glowing structure of the runes also became more and more complex. 10, 20, 30, 50. When she had command over 100 runes, she waved her slender hand and the runes fell like rain, quickly flying out behind her. Freeze! Yolanda commanded in an authoritative tone then. At her words, the mournful wails behind them stopped. She did it. Zen's eyes flashed hopefully. After the sound disappeared, Esther also drew in a deep, shuddering breath. It seemed that Yolanda had succeeded. I've only temporarily sealed it, and only for a short period of time. Let's go, Yolanda urged them on. Her words immediately made everyone's hearts skip a beat. They began to run forward. After running for several dozen miles, they finally stopped. No one dared to risk glancing backward. Ouch! Fabian let out a long groan and heaved a sigh. Only now did he find some relief from the pain brought on by the spiritual thorn. Although he was still in pain and unable to think clearly, he still knew what had happened just now. He said miserably, luckily, Zen, you saved my life. Can we look back now? Esther asked. Not only Esther, but all of the others were still immersed in a gnawing fear. Yolanda nodded and said, I think we've finally gotten rid of that thing. Only then did they dare to turn their heads. As warriors, not one of them was afraid of those powerful monsters. What truly scared them was the unknown things, just like the thing that had been floating behind them. Until now, no one had known what that thing was. They turned around, but there was nothing to be seen behind them. Zen also turned around and gazed off into the distance. A jade-green light shone in his pupils. After his eyes had been cleansed by the sap from the divine tree, he was now able to clearly see what was hidden over longer distances away. But because of the extra long distance, what he saw was still very vague. In the distance, he saw a pale white speck of light pulsating, and around that speck of light, several glowing runes floated. These were the runes which had been released by Yolanda earlier. The light seemed to be constantly struggling, attempting to escape the seal which bound it. Stop looking. It can feel your gaze, Yolanda quickly interceded, stopping Zen's potentially dangerous action. It can even feel my gaze. Shocked, Zen immediately cast his eyes down. At the same time, that menacing light quickly disappeared into the darkness. It was indeed very perilous just now. Fortunately, that little fellow hasn't reached adulthood yet. Yolanda pouted, revealing a rare smile. It was a minor, Zen asked in surprise, and then frowned and questioned her further, what on earth was it? We are not allowed to mention its name or think about it. If we did, it would know, track us down and probably chase after us again, Yolanda said, shaking her head to caution Zen. Everyone was left speechless. Just what was that evil thing? Why couldn't they even think about it? Lavender chipped in, I know what it is. What is it? Zen asked again, curiosity tearing at him. As Yolanda said, we dare not mention its name. Lavender replied, also shaking her head. Everyone had nearly been driven mad by the encounter. There were too many strange things in this world. But no matter what that thing was, no one wanted to discuss it any further. After experiencing that extreme fear, none of them wanted to experience it for a second time. Esther looked around, her eyes revealing a glimmer of light. "We're actually here," she exclaimed in surprise. Fabian drew forth a soul-healing pill and stuffed it into his mouth. Although Zen's spiritual thorn had not caused too much damage to him, he did not have a soul as strong as Zen's. He had to take remedial care of his weakened soul. After swallowing the pill, he grunted and asked, "What is this place?" Esther waved her hand, and a map appeared in her hand. It was the map of the Dark Nether Cave. She pointed to a mark etched on the map and said, "I marked this place 3 years ago. Here we should find the relic of a powerful warrior." However, at that time, this area was protected by a dozen of the poisonous ghost martens, making it impossible for anyone to enter. It was hard to accurately predict the strength of the powerhouses in the Dark Nether Cave, and they had left unimaginable treasures in the places where they died. Back then, the Demon Knight had also paid a heavy price to explore the area, so they were unwilling to give up easily. However, the strength of those martens was so strong that even the top-level warlords couldn't eliminate them. The Demon Knight lost more than 10 lives, trying in vain to lure the martens away. In the end, they had been left with no choice but to give up. What Esther hadn't expected was that with the eruption of the tide of chaos, the inner area had been emptied. Therefore, the relic of the strong warrior would naturally be left behind unguarded. At this thought, Esther smiled eagerly. Hearing what Esther said, Fabian and Jared also felt pleasantly surprised. They had risked their lives to walk around here in the inner area. They couldn't leave without getting something in return. What did a master in the Dark Nether Cave mean? They were well aware that the relics of a master would probably contain countless treasures and unimaginable things. "Well then, let's go in and see what we will find," Zen suggested. After that mad dash just now, the flame emitted by the jade butterfly in his space ring had clearly shrunk. Obviously, he was now heading in the wrong direction. However, he was not in a hurry at the moment. Since Esther was sure that there was a great opportunity ahead, he felt it was worth to take a detour and check it out. Thus, under Esther's lead, the group continued forward. After passing through a patch of dark and twisted trees, Esther pointed ahead and said, "It's over there." Just as they made their way out of the forest, they saw a plain and lonely gate in front of them. The scene was eerie. There was no house, no roof, no walls, nothing but a gate standing there in the middle of nowhere. Moreover, the gate also looked quite ordinary. There were no inscriptions or any identifying markings on it. It was only a small, single gate like those found in ordinary houses. "This is the relic?" Fabian asked doubtfully. "Yes, there should be words hidden on that gate." Esther was still on high alert. She shot out a stream of life vitality towards that gate while cautiously keeping her distance. Back then, she had brought the members of the Demon Knight here. Just as they had figured out the hidden words, they had been attacked by a group of poisonous ghost martens. So they had no choice then but to give up and leave. After Esther poured her life vitality into the gate, a row of large words appeared on it. "I am Adolf. I spent my life in fruitless efforts and my dreams shattered here." It was obvious that the words on the gate was an epitaph that Adolf had written for himself. Yolanda looked at the gate, lost in thought. Her eyes flickered. As she blinked, her face revealed a brief trace of grief. Lavender knitted her brows and said in disbelief, "Adolf is dead." Unexpectedly, he too died here. As she spoke, she turned to look at Yolanda with a mysterious expression on her face. "My queen, who is Adolf?" Esther asked in a hushed tone. Lavender smiled faintly and answered, "He was a powerful being whose name could have shaken the entire world. I didn't expect him to die here." "What a joke." Hearing Lavender's words, Yolanda lightly bit her lips but didn't say anything. "This gate should then be a treasure left behind by Adolf, right?" Esther asked again. "Yes, indeed. This is his life's treasure, the gate of Samsara," Lavender said in her usual deadpan voice. In fact, she was as experienced as Yolanda. However, the secrets of the Dark Nether Cave had originated from the human race, so she certainly didn't know them as well as Yolanda did. Chapter 633, Cultivate Warrior Spirit. Their eyes lit up as Lavender spoke the name of the treasure. If they could collect this treasure, then that would surely mean. Could it be? Adolf, the owner of this gate, had nature under his thumb, which meant this treasure must undoubtedly be at the sacred level at least. Treasures above this level had never appeared on the Sea God continent. However, Lavender's next words doused their hope, as if being drenched in ice-cold water. Don't even think of refining the gate of samsara. It's of no use. Leave alone you guys, even Amber won't be able to do it. Why? Fabian asked. Lavender ignored his question and only said, try it and you'll know. Admittedly, temptation of the gate of samsara was too great for everyone, including Fabian. If they could bring the gate back, it would, without a doubt, be the most precious treasure of their clan. Fabian and Jared didn't believe Lavender and walked on towards the gate. Esther also wanted to give it a try, but Lavender was her queen, and she didn't doubt what Lavender had said. If Lavender said that the gate couldn't be taken away, that was it. Esther contained the impulse to try refining it in her heart. As Fabian and Jared walked towards the gate, they saw that the words on the gate became bigger and bigger. Each of these words gave out a blinding aura. Only then did they realize that this was precisely why it was extremely difficult to approach the gate. It's strange, really strange, Fabian exclaimed. The gate had been standing there for years. The aura of the words written on it was constantly weakening with the passage of time. But it still was frightening. Just a few words, without any visible source of power being poured into them, made it difficult for Fabian and Jared to advance. They couldn't help but wonder about how powerful the owner of the gate was. It took Fabian and Jared quite a few minutes to get close to the gate. They were already sweating profusely as they gasped for breath. This gate is so weird. But we're finally here. They rested for a while, during which, both of them were preoccupied with their own thoughts. Zen was also here, and the woman who had presented herself as his sword spirit had said that no one could refine the gate. If they made it, they could take it away. This thought excited them, and they itched to try it out. I'll go first, Fabian said, his jaw set and fists clenched. He also knew that it wouldn't be easy to refine this gate, so he cut open his fingertip and used his own blood to assist in the refinement. Not far away, Zen looked at the sarcastic expression on Lavender's face and said, you should give them a clear explanation. What else should I explain? I've already warned them, but they just don't listen. Lavender shook her head before she continued, it's useless. Yolanda also shook her head but remained silent. She also knew that it was wishful thinking to expect to refine this gate. But she was unemotional, quiet, and reserved. Even if she knew that no one would succeed, she wouldn't remind them. Fabian made a great effort to establish a connection with the gate using his own blood. However, the moment the connection worked, an invisible repulsive force shot out from the gate. The force was so powerful that it pushed Fabian away and he fell heavily to the ground. Fortunately, the force had done nothing more than push him away. If it had been used with the intent to kill, then he would have been killed hundreds of times. Are you all right? Jared asked, concerned. Looking at Fabian's sorry state, he knew that there was no point trying anymore. After escaping death, Fabian became more determined. He jumped up from the ground and with a disbelieving look, said angrily, I can't believe this. But I know that I must take this gate back today. The moment he uttered the last word, he rushed ahead again and tried to put the gate into his space ring. The space ring contained the power of infinite space. But it was made of material and was different from the space law that most martial artists had comprehended. Fabian wanted to use the ring's power of space to take the gate. As long as he could get it back, he would have plenty of opportunities to refine it. Even if he couldn't refine it, it would be a sacred object in the sacred place. This was exactly his plan. He won't make it, Lavender said. Yolanda gently shook her head. As she stared at the words on the gate, grief came in waves. As Fabian tried to suck the gate into his space ring, a crack appeared on his ring. Surprised, he cried out before hurriedly throwing his ring away. Whirling, bang, his ring spun several times before it suddenly exploded. At the same time as it exploded, a small spatial vortex appeared, swallowing up the ring before finally completely disappearing. Oh no, my space ring, Fabian cried out again. He wanted to sob but no tears came out. The space within the space ring wasn't always stable. Most space rings had a time limit, and some could only last 5 to 10 years after being forged. These were low-grade space rings, and their space was extremely small. The space ring that Zen had gotten from Evil Lan was a low-grade one. Because its space wasn't stable enough, after several years, the Sumeru space would collapse and everything stored within would vanish like smoke. On the other hand, the space ring that Letitia had given Zen was pretty good. The space inside was more than 100 times larger and was much more stable. The Sumeru space within would not collapse for at least 50 or even 100 years. Fabian's space ring was about the same grade as Zen's. All his things were stored inside. He had forcefully used his space ring in the hope of absorbing the gate of samsara. But what he hadn't expected was that his ring would be directly activated by the gate, causing the ring to collapse. Serves you right, Lavender sneered. Zen put up his hands, as if to indicate people to leave him out. He was not going to get involved in this. My queen, what is the use of this gate if it cannot be taken away? Esther asked Lavender. Lavender smiled mysteriously and said, although it cannot be taken away, it is very useful to you. What? Why? Zen chipped in. As its name, the Gate of Samsara, suggests, one of its most important abilities is to let you experience the endless cycle of birth and suffering and death and rebirth. It can cultivate your warrior spirit, Lavender answered. It can cultivate warrior spirit? Esther, Zen, and the others felt that was rather inconceivable. Yes, Lavender nodded. Warriors of the lower world like Zen, Esther, and Fabian felt that the warrior spirit had to be slowly sharpened. They had to constantly take blows, exert themselves, and stabilize their spirit. This was a method for a warrior to temper his spirit, and also a process for a young warrior to mature slowly. But in the final analysis, the warrior spirit was only a part of their personality. To put it bluntly, it was their spirit. How could they cultivate it? Zen and the others couldn't figure it out at all. Looking at their disbelieving faces, Lavender said, in the upper world, all kinds of cultivation methods are unimaginable. Since the Gate of Samsara is here, I think Yolanda wouldn't mind if you enter to cultivate. Am I right, Yolanda? The confusion increased. What was Yolanda's part in entering the Gate of Samsara? Lavender's words were baffling and didn't seem to make sense. But Yolanda nodded cautiously and said, you're right. I don't mind letting you in. You don't? Esther stared at Yolanda in bewilderment. You're the owner of the gate. Yolanda didn't reply, and Lavender didn't seem to have any intention of explaining to them. However, according to Lavender, this gate was magical and could not be taken away, which was why, despite their doubts, they would not let go of this opportunity to cultivate. Spirit could only be tempered by warriors' experiences, and it was related to warriors' growing environment and how they saw the world. For example, a talent who grew up without obstacles was spoken highly of and seldom encountered problems in his training. But his spirit was very fragile, and he was vulnerable to heavy blows. Once he became frustrated, it was very likely that he would never rise again and be a warrior. But if he could withstand the blows, he would become more mature, tenacious, and confident. The spirit could be sharpened by repeated attacks, which was inevitable for the growth of warriors. The opportunity to sharpen the spirit was a matter of chance rather than choice. Even a minor mistake would bring about great negative effects. So it was strange to hear that they could cultivate their spirit. I'll go inside first, Fabian said, taking the lead and walking up to the gate. It was difficult to collect the gate, but there was no prohibition on doing so. Fabian pushed at it lightly and it swung open. There was a small whirlpool in the middle of the gate, moving slowly anti-clockwise. Is it dangerous? The scene worried Fabian, but he knew that caution was important for safety. Yolanda and Lavender seemed to know the origin of the gate, but no one knew what danger was waiting for them. Lavender shook her head. Not at all. You can go in. Fabian nodded and continued to walk ahead. As soon as he stepped into the whirlpool, a golden light flashed, in which everyone felt the passage of time. It's the time law, said Zen, staring at the light. It was not some low-level time law that could be ignored, but a high-layer one. No one could explain its mystery. After all, the warriors on the Sea God continent could only comprehend the first or the second layer of the time law. In the central region, no one could comprehend the time law. Compared with the space law, the time law was rarer and more mysterious. The light on the Gate of Samsara flickered slowly. They thought they would have to wait for a long time, maybe a day or even a few days. After all, cultivation speed was known to be slow. Some cultivation methods needed many years. Only after decades or hundreds of years could warriors reach the peak. Fortunately, they were not pressed for time in the dark nether cave. The dark nether death light wouldn't be weakened until about a month later. However, they didn't expect to see Fabian come out of the gate after just a few seconds. How did he come out so quickly? What could he have cultivated in such a short time? Maybe it has something to do with the time law. It's a mysterious law, so it may be able to shorten the time to the extreme. Maybe a long time has passed behind the gate. Fabian, say something. Don't keep us guessing. Only then did they notice that Fabian was standing in front of the gate, staring straight ahead, stunned. What is he doing over there? Is he scared silly? Jared walked quickly to Fabian and waved his hand in front of him. Fabian swatted Jared's hand away and said, "Don't touch me. I'm thinking. Thinking. Right here." Jared was confused. What is behind the gate of samsara? Looks like it makes people foolish. I'm not a fool, Fabian said hotly, but eventually rolled his eyes and pulled Jared aside. You can go in too. I have learned a lot inside. What the heck? Jared muttered. Fabian looked normal after coming out of the gate, but Jared had found some subtle changes on him. His eyes, for example, had become more intense. Jared and Fabian were like brothers, so Jared knew that Fabian wouldn't harm him. With this confidence and without hesitation, he stepped into the gate. A few seconds later, Jared came out of the gate. Like Fabian, his eyes had dulled. He murmured, "What a surprise." Neither Yolanda nor Lavender spoke. They seemed to know what had happened. Esther and the other two top-level warlords of the Demon Knight were puzzled. This behavior from Fabian and Jared was only piquing their curiosity about the gate of samsara. Esther took a step forward and entered the gate. When she came out, her eyes were calm as water but like black pearls that glowed faintly. Then, without a word, she walked up to stand beside Lavender, silent. Next, the two top-level warlords of the Demon Knight entered the gate of samsara one after the other. Zen was the last one to enter. Zen had also asked Lavender what the gate was about. She had smiled faintly but hadn't answered his question. She just told him that he would understand everything after he went inside. It wasn't long before it was Zen's turn. He stopped at the gate and looked around before stepping into it. The raging time law wrapped him up. He now felt that time here seemed to stop. All the voices disappeared and he was left alone in the darkness. Zen was also very interested in learning about how to cultivate his spirit. As the name of the gate suggested, it must have something to do with the circle of life. Compared with learning about luck, it was even more difficult to know whether people would be reincarnated after they died. It was simply impossible to determine whether they would have a next life. It was said that after death, people would be put through the 6 great divisions in the wheel of karma and go to Avachi hell. But the question was, where were the 6 great divisions in the wheel of karma? And where was this perdition? The last time Zen practiced the stellar body, he had traveled through the universe with his consciousness, saw the true face of the world, and greatly broadened his vision. However, he also understood that what he had seen was only the tip of the iceberg. The universe had endless mysteries and it would take him many years to explore every one of them. Perhaps the process of exploration was the significance of life. As Zen thought through this, he spotted a huge golden spiral in front of him. He was then sucked into it and his surroundings changed gradually. Where am I? Zen muttered, unable to believe his eyes. He found himself in gold armor, standing on the wall of the burning sky imperial capital, holding a golden machete and looking into the distance. My hands and feet are out of control. He subconsciously wanted to move but failed. He then involuntarily waved his machete and roared at the front, "My dear generals and soldiers, the burning sky imperial capital has been destroyed. After I ascend the throne, I'll rule the city with you all. Charge!" Beneath the wall, many soldiers in gold armor charged towards the burning sky imperial capital. Fire beacons could be seen everywhere within the imperial capital and blood was flowing on the ground like water. As Zen looked around, puzzled, dozens of emerald green lights suddenly rose in the sky before him. The first person to come into view was Aura. Many martial artists who were at the internal elixir realm stood beside Aura. "Zen Luo, you traitor. The burning sky palace will kill you no matter what price we may have to pay." Aura, along with the martial artists at the internal elixir realm, surrounded Zen like a stream of inescapable light. Zen laughed wildly. He waved his golden machete and ran ahead to meet the attack. The two sides began to fight fiercely. Zen was in the body that charged, but he couldn't control what he said or what he did. He only knew that he had become a traitor to the Burning Sky Empire and was about to usurp the state power. If he defeated the people in front of him, he would be able to rule the empire and become a new emperor in the eastern region. Is this what happened in the past? Or is it a dream? Zen calmly watched the fierce battle in front of him. Like an outsider, he watched the drama unfold. Chapter 634, 99 Cycles of Reincarnation. The battle lasted a whole day and night. Corpses lay all over the burning sky imperial capital, surrounded by fiery light. The war had plunged the people of the empire into suffering and misery. Zen had killed 10 masters of the internal elixir realm with his strength alone. Only Aura had been able to escape. After that, Zen led a troop of soldiers to the Burning Sky Palace. In the end, he successfully ascended the throne that he had fought for day and night. He stood at the top of the Burning Sky Palace, overlooking the world. 1,000,000 strong soldiers dressed in golden armor were kneeling in front of Zen with great respect. It was a spectacular scene to behold in the peak of Zen's life. Quora, the last remaining descendant of the Su clan, had been captured. Is this another life of mine? Zen frowned. Although these scenes were an illusion in Zen's eyes, they were still vivid in his mind. He could see all the details. Everything seemed real but absurd. I should be the one to kill the last princess of the Su clan. With that, Zen leapt up with his golden blade in hand and slashed at Quora. However, just as his blade was about to touch Quora's skin, a ray of sword light shot toward him. Ding! The sword light knocked Zen's golden machete away from Quora. Rocher. Zen saw Rocher dressed in a white robe and looking at him with an indifferent expression. Although Rocher was standing before 1,000,000 strong soldiers, there wasn't the slightest trace of fear on his face. Who are you? Zen couldn't help but ask. Rocher smiled faintly. Who am I? I'm a swordsman. Why have you come here? Zen asked again. The Burning Sky Empire is an ally of the Cloud Sect, and the Cloud Sect is under the jurisdiction of the Cloud Hall. I come from the Cloud Hall, Rocher said nonchalantly. If you want to usurp the throne, you have to ask the Cloud Hall members for their approval first. Go to perdition, Zen roared and rushed toward Rocher. Ding, ding, ding. The two of them attacked each other, exchanging thousands of strikes in the blink of an eye. In the end, Rocher retreated 100 feet and raised his long sword. At that moment, the color of heaven and earth changed. The sky was overrun by dark clouds and smoky fog. The momentum of Rocher's sword strike suppressed that of 1,000,000 strong soldiers. With your strength, you are far from qualified to be able to take over this country. After Rocher finished speaking, he stabbed Zen with his sword. This sword strike was so powerful that Zen wasn't able to block it. Rocher's sword easily cut off Zen's head from his body. The moment he was killed, Zen felt resentment, anger, helplessness, and other sorts of emotions swarming his mind. Is this my fate in another life? The scenes gradually disappeared, and Zen found himself immersed in darkness once again. Now, he somewhat understood the meaning of the Gate of Samsara. No wonder he'd been able to cultivate his warrior spirit through the Gate of Samsara. It seemed that it had the ability to create an endless cycle of birth and death. After personally experiencing it, he would be able to absorb the emotions of his different lives and gain insights in the cycle of reincarnation. This way, he could experience life or death situations and learn something from them. This mysterious item that existed in the upper world was truly miraculous. This method of cultivating the warrior spirit had indeed broadened Zen's horizons. He found it incredible. Soon after, a golden vortex appeared in front of him, followed by new scenery. In this life, Zen wasn't a warrior, but a cook guarding the stove. He was busy at the stove every day, surrounded by smoke. One day, he slaughtered a wild dog and found a magical jade pendant inside it. It was this jade pendant that changed his life. Then, he became a warrior again. However, Zen didn't enter the Cloud Sect. Instead, he was an independent warrior and rapidly rose to prominence in the eastern region. Then, he founded a great sect that was comparable to the Cloud Sect and became its head. In the third cycle of reincarnation, Zen was a great learned scholar who had a great reputation in the eastern region. In the face of the demon's attack, he decisively chose to become a leader and led the White Emperor's city soldiers to resist the demon's attack. The fourth cycle of reincarnation. The fifth cycle of reincarnation. The sixth cycle of reincarnation. Scenes from numerous cycles of reincarnation zoomed past Zen one by one. Everything he had experienced during these cycles of reincarnation left a deep impression on him. The more things a person experienced, the more profound his thoughts would be. He would also become increasingly insightful. After experiencing these cycles of reincarnation, Zen's warrior spirit slowly rose to a higher level. As the cycles of reincarnation kept rotating and changing, various fates flashed by as well. From the beginning to the end, Zen experienced each of the unique aspects of different fates. The beginning of each new reincarnation was the end of an old one. In this short period of time, Zen experienced 99 cycles of reincarnation. When it was all over, Zen walked out of the Gate of Samsara feeling stunned. He had viewed so many cycles of reincarnation in such a short time that he wasn't able to digest all the information yet. However, its effect on his warrior spirit was obvious. After experiencing all these different lives, Zen thoroughly comprehended life and death, glory, power, and desire. How many cycles of reincarnation did you experience? Esther asked Zen. Everyone looked at him, waiting for his answer. Zen was slightly taken aback. Why are you asking me such a question? Isn't the number of everyone's cycles of reincarnation the same? How much time has passed? 2 hours, Lavender said with a smile. That long? Zen was stunned. Just now, many warriors had wondered if Zen had died since he hadn't come out for a long time. The number of cycles of reincarnation one sees in the gate of samsara is determined by the strength of his warrior spirit. The stronger a person's warrior spirit is, the greater his number of cycles of reincarnation will be, Yolanda explained. Every cycle of reincarnation would have a great impact on a warrior. If one's warrior spirit wasn't strong enough, he would gradually lose himself in one cycle after another. After a point, he wouldn't be able to tell the difference between reality and a cycle of reincarnation. Therefore, when a warrior tried to cultivate through cycles of reincarnation, the moment his mind showed some sign of losing its way, the reincarnation would disappear and he would be released from the gate of samsara. I experienced 9 cycles of reincarnation, Fabian said. I only had 6 cycles of reincarnation, Jared uttered. Esther remarked, I went through 13 cycles of reincarnation. What about you, Zen? Me, I seem to experience 99 cycles, answered Zen. 99 cycles. Fabian's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he heard Zen. How did you experience so many cycles? Didn't you lose yourself after a point? Lose myself? How can that happen? Zen asked curiously. Esther and the others were bewildered. It seemed that Zen's warrior spirit was just too strong. Zen's warrior spirit is indeed much stronger than an ordinary warrior's. The gate of samsara is made from the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Although it can't replace the real path of reincarnation, the power of the samsara is enough to make many warriors lose themselves. The maximum number of cycles a warrior can experience in the gate of samsara is 99. Yolanda seemed to know everything about the gate of samsara. I see. Zen finally understood why he had gone through reincarnation 99 times. However, from the beginning to the end, he hadn't felt like he was losing his warrior spirit at all. Looking at the gate of samsara, Fabian smacked his lips and said, it really is a magical treasure. If only I could take it to the Purple Heart sacred place. Lavender sneered, take it to the Purple Heart sacred place. Do you really think you'll be able to keep the gate of samsara there? What makes you think we won't be able to keep it? Fabian was slightly indignant. If a treasure of this level leaves this place, the aura it emits will not be hidden by the cursed land. The gate of samsara might attract supreme masters from the upper world. With their powerful strength, those masters can easily destroy the entire sea god continent and take it away, Lavender uttered indifferently. Hearing Lavender's words, Fabian went pale in shock. Lavender was right. Some inheritances within the dark nether cave were too powerful and precious to be kept by a small force of the lower world. Zen looked at the gate of samsara. He was still slowly digesting and comprehending the complex emotions that he had experienced in the cycles of reincarnation. At this moment, he said, since that's the case, let's continue our exploration. Although the gate of samsara was magical, it wasn't the inheritance that Mist had mentioned. I'm afraid you won't have the chance to continue the exploration now. A deep voice rang out, loud and deafening enough to make everyone's ears tingle. Zen was shocked to hear this familiar voice. He looked in the direction where the sound had come from and saw Malcolm's burly figure some distance away. Chapter 635, Block Malcolm's Attack. A War Sage. Esther's eyes widened in shock. Judging from the aura emitted from Malcolm's body, she figured he had already become a war sage. Fabian's and Jared's faces darkened immediately. Hadn't the ogres already left the Tower of Sin? How had these 2 ogres appeared here? The sudden appearance of these 2 ogres reminded them of Colin and Neil, who had also suddenly appeared out of nowhere in the Tower of Sin. The ogres had dominated the Tower of Sin for so many years and had grasped some secrets about the tower that no one knew about. However, as much as all the warriors were surprised, they didn't show any trace of fear on their faces. On the contrary, their breaths were steady and their auras were calm and unperturbed. Even when they were facing a war sage like Malcolm, they were surprisingly composed. Ironically, it was Malcolm who was slightly puzzled. A doubtful expression appeared on his face and he became alert at once. What was wrong with these guys? Why weren't they panicking at all when death was at hand? He could understand the nonchalant looks on the faces of the 2 freaks, Lavender and Yolanda. Since they were from the upper world, their dedication to martial arts had taken them to a level that warriors from the lower world would never be able to measure up to. For example, Yolanda hadn't even considered entering the Gate of Samsara because the cultivation method in the Gate of Samsara was useless to her. She had divided her soul into a million parts so that millions of her avatars could cultivate continuously at the same time. With the experiences she would gain from all these various separate bodies combined, her method of cultivation was countless times more efficient than that of the Gate of Samsara. But why would Zen and Esther be so calm? Even the usually timid Fabian and Jared, the two top-level warlords of the human race, looked at Malcolm with indifferent expressions. What was going on? Malcolm was a little disappointed and upset. He had hidden in the narrow secret passageway under the Tower of Sin for a few months, waiting for this moment to stun them all. He had expected Zen and the rest to either flee in panic or kneel down and beg for mercy the moment he showed up. He'd never expected them to stand calmly without the slightest trace of shock or fear. After some thought, he sneered. Do you think you're still in the Tower of Sin? Do you think that Zen still possesses the omnipotent ability to kill anyone? When Fabian heard Malcolm's words, he calmly said, "Of course we aren't as stupid as you think we are. But since you're here, only a calm mind will help us deal with you." The thing was, Malcolm didn't know that these warriors had just experienced multiple cycles of life and death. They had experienced many different lives in the Gate of Samsara and had gained deep insight on life and death. As a result, they were more strong-willed now. This was the effect of cultivation on the warrior spirit. If a person's warrior spirit was excitable, it would bring trouble at a critical moment. He wouldn't even be able to bring out his strength in a fight. For example, back when the group was being chased by something horrible, Fabian had been so terrified that he had been on the verge of collapse. He'd even lost his head and forgotten to escape. If it hadn't been for Zen's spiritual thorn which had stunned him for a moment, he would have died. On the other hand, Yolanda had been able to remain calm and think of a solution to the problem. In the end, she had used her demon sealing skill to seal that horrible thing. Thanks to her, everyone had been able to escape. The stronger a person's warrior spirit was, the more likely he would be able to remain composed in times of emergency and bring his strength into full play. Since everyone present here had cultivated in the Gate of Samsara and strengthened their warrior spirit, they were all able to be exceptionally calm now. Deal with me. Do you think a few top-level warlords can take me on? Malcolm laughed sinisterly. Esther stared straight at Malcolm. When you were a top-level warlord, you were far from being my match. Do you think that has changed just because you've made a breakthrough and become a war sage? Are you sure you have the ability to challenge me now? Amongst the 128 seat holders, Esther ranked the first. She was the strongest top-level warlord, while Malcolm was just ranked in the middle. Even though he'd become a war sage, he was only a level 1 war sage. Esther still had the potential to enervate him. Let's fight, then you'll find out whether I have the ability to challenge you or not. Malcolm didn't want to waste time talking anymore. The inner circle had undergone a huge change. Even though he was a war sage, it was still very dangerous for him to stay here too long. He had to finish this battle as soon as possible. He knew clearly that he had become a daredevil from the moment he had entered the secret passage under the Tower of Sin. Now, his only goal was to kill Zen. The moment Zen died, all the threats the ogre race was facing would be gone. The ogres would regain the power that they had enjoyed in the past. Then, the ogres would once again return to the Tower of Sin. If Malcolm could kill Zen and safely return to the Tower of Sin, then he would become the hero of the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. The ogres valued honor above everything, so being the hero of the ogre race would be the supreme glory for him. He would be to the ogre race what Lavender was to the demon knight, a supreme being that no one dared to disobey. Attack! Malcolm gave the order and started to move forward. His massive body suddenly flashed as he charged straight towards Zen. As soon as Malcolm made a move, Rihan began to attack. The 3 top-level warlords of the Night Group also joined them in the attack. Protect Zen, Fabian said calmly. If he had faced this situation a few days ago, he would have lost his head already. But now, he looked extremely calm. Even though he knew he was no match for Malcolm, he still acted in an orderly manner and managed to arrange everything in his control. Thanks to the cultivation in the Gate of Samsara, his warrior spirit had become a lot stronger. Yes, I only just stepped into the level of war sage. And it's true that with your strength, you can even kill a common level 2 war sage. But don't forget that I, Malcolm, am also a divine level talent. The forceful energy within Malcolm's body suddenly burst out as a turbulent aura erupted forth. At the same time, a long saber appeared in his hands. Evil God Slash. Malcolm unleashed his strongest attack on the first strike. He was determined to kill Zen in one blow. He had only one goal in his mind and nothing else mattered. All the other people in front of him weren't important. The most important thing was to kill Zen. If he could manage to kill Zen, then it would be all over. As long as the ogres could control the secret at the bottom of the Tower of Sin, then with Malcolm's strength as a war sage, no one in the Tower of Sin would be able to fight against them. Fabian and Jared raised their swords at the same time, one from the left and the other from the right. Streams of sword intent began to entangle with each other, forming spirals in the air. Double Jade Sword Energy. Break, kill, annihilate, tribulate. Jared and Fabian worked closely together in an orderly fashion. Streams of profound and mysterious sword intent shot forward to counterattack Malcolm's strike. However, when their sword intents met Malcolm's blade, they instantly shattered into pieces. Fabian and Jared frowned. Usually, the two of them could deal with ordinary war sages when they worked together. It seemed that Malcolm was not an ordinary war sage. Change the moves, Fabian shouted. The two of them continued to block Malcolm's attack. Meanwhile, Zen wasn't just staying idle and watching them fight. Facing Malcolm's saber that was coming at him, Zen quickly retreated. All of a sudden, his eyes flashed and the surface of his body glowed with streaks of starlight. When Malcolm used his evil god Slash, it seemed as if there really was a fiendish evil god that was charging straight at Zen. Even though Fabian and Jared had gone all out to block it, they couldn't stop it. Seeing that the saber had gotten enough to touch him, Zen threw a punch. Star shakes the earth. A vortex formed by the starlight instantly engulfed the evil god unleashed by Malcolm's strike. Shatter. Zen knew the power of his stellar body. The force of this punch would be able to kill a war sage who was at the initial level, so it should be enough for him to resist Malcolm's saber. However, something strange happened. Everybody watched in horror as the fierce-looking evil god split into three just as it was about to get sucked into the vortex. Turning into three separate blade energies, it charged toward Zen from three different directions. Dang it, Zen's face darkened. It was obvious that he had underestimated the strength of a war sage. Or perhaps he had underestimated Malcolm's strength. The ogres must have left Malcolm and Rihan behind as part of a prudent plan when they had left the Tower of Sin. It was true that Malcolm had made a breakthrough to become a war sage. But it wasn't as simple as it seemed. Shatter. At this time, Lavender thrust her spear out from the side of Zen's body, and the tip of the spear stabbed into a piece of blade energy. With a slight twist of her long spear, the blade energy was shredded into pieces. At the same time, Yolanda started her finger attack, shattering another blade energy. As for the last blade energy, it was forcefully blocked by Zen's sword, a top-grade sacred weapon. Malcolm was taken aback when he saw that these warriors were able to block his attack. Then, he shook his head. You're not bad, Zen. You seem to have improved a lot in the past few months and now I have to look at you with new eyes. Perhaps in another year, I will be far from being your opponent. Unfortunately for you, you're still not anywhere near being able to defeat me now. And you won't have any chance to surpass me in the future, because you're going to die today. Chapter 636, The Core Area. After Malcolm had finished speaking, he took a black fruit from his space ring. With a gentle pinch of his fan-like hand, the fruit was instantly crushed. A black smoke emerged from the fruit and started to swirl around him. 5 months ago, I said that I'd kill you, Zen. Today, you will surely die here. The black smoke continued to gather around him and turned into a huge pair of black wings which seemed to have sprouted from his back. Seeing those large black wings spread out, both Lavender and Yolanda frowned at the same time. The ogres have actually obtained that guy's inheritance, Lavender said with a cold expression. Zen could feel that the pair of black wings was extraordinary, but even with his growing experience, he still could not recognize what it was. This is the fruit of the Dark Sky Mage, Yolanda clarified. The Dark Sky Mage. Zen was stunned. It's just that his name was Dark Sky Mage and he was a being similar to a world lord. He possessed the strength of a world lord, but he didn't actually control a world. Probably, he was equivalent to the existence of an independent warrior of the central region, Lavender explained. What is the use of this fruit? Zen asked again. As you can see, the fruit can greatly increase his strength within a short period of time. Lavender shook her head and whispered to Zen, get ready to run. The vision and perceptions of both Lavender and Yolanda were far beyond those of Zen, Esther, and the other warriors of the lower world. At the beginning, Lavender had not proposed that they escape, instead she had determined that both sides still had the strength to fight. Even though Malcolm was a war sage, they could still oppose him. Esther and the other two top-level warlords of the Demon Knight were capable of dealing with Rihan and the three other top-level warlords of the Knight group. What Zen and the others needed to do was stall Malcolm. Once Esther and her companions finished off their opponents, they could join forces with Zen and his companions. Malcolm would probably not be able to win against them all. But Lavender hadn't expected that Malcolm actually had the fruit of the Dark Sky Mage. In reality, the fruit could not only stimulate the potential of one's body, but could also enable one to use a kind of secret technique. As to whether or not Malcolm possessed this secret technique, it would all depend on whether or not the ogres had obtained the complete inheritance of the Dark Sky Mage. With both hands on the spear, Lavender raised it and thrust it toward Malcolm. An invisible and deadly wave was about to pierce through him. Go. Of course, Lavender didn't think for even a moment that her attack would be able to kill Malcolm. The only thing she could hope to gain would be time for Zen to retreat. Of course, Zen wouldn't flaunt his true strength at such a critical time. As soon as Lavender finished speaking, he shot backwards like a flying arrow. On the other hand, Esther was leading the two top-level warlords of the Demon Knight to force back Rihan and the three top-level warlords of the Knight group in a fierce battle. The members of the Demon Knight were much stronger than the members of the other races. Although Rihan had been cultivating in the secret passageway, it was a pity he did not break through to become a war sage. His strength had not improved much. As for the other three, although they were also top-level warlords, they were not that experienced at hand-to-hand combat. Their strengths lay in sneak attack. They were not Esther's match at all. Esther was constantly oppressing Rihan. However, after hearing Lavender's order, she immediately gave up on the idea of attacking. To her, Lavender's order was the supreme imperial edict. Let's go. The three top-level warlords of the Demon Knight immediately turned into streaks of light and followed behind Zen. You won't be able to escape. A cold smile appeared on Malcolm's face. After he dodged the spear, the pair of black wings behind him suddenly flapped. His speed was astonishingly fast, and like the whirlwind his winged figure chased after Zen. The humiliation which he had suffered in the Tower of Sin and the grievances which he had endured these past few months were continuously being released from within Malcolm's heart. At this moment, he actually wished that the game would last longer. He was enjoying this game of cat and mouse. Hurry up, let's catch up to them. Rihan led the three members of the Knight group and followed behind them. The three members of the Knight group secretly rolled their eyes. In fact, Shane really wanted to tell Rihan that the three of them had already completed their mission by having led Malcolm to Zen, and that it was Malcolm and Rihan's task to kill Zen. Shane didn't want to stay in this place any longer. He had been chased by these monsters for such a long way, and he had almost lost his life. However, Shane could only think of it in his heart, and if he dared to say it aloud, the result would probably end up being him slaughtered on the spot. Not to mention, in this situation, they didn't have the guts to go out the way they had come by themselves. They didn't dare to face the monsters alone. You won't be able to escape, Zen. You should just capitulate and surrender to me. I can make your death a bit more comfortable. Malcolm laughed out loud behind him. His speed was extremely fast, and the distance between him and Zen was constantly closing. It seemed that he was about to launch his final attack on Zen. Lavender's eyes flashed as she galloped along behind Zen. She suddenly stopped on the spot and her long spear danced wildly. The spear suddenly shot out and a formless ripple swiftly enveloped Malcolm, momentarily stopping his pursuit of Zen. Your spear skills are indeed powerful. It is truly surprising. With your strength, you are actually able to unleash such extreme power. What a pity, it's still useless. Malcolm brandished the battle blade in his hand. Having devoured the black fruit, he was much more powerful than he used to be. Just a single blade strike broke apart Lavender's spear attack. Not only that, but that blade's energy didn't weaken at all, and it continued cutting towards Lavender's body. Ha ha, die! The blade's aura instantly slashed into her chest, immediately shattering her tall body. Lavender was indeed struck to death by Malcolm. However, she was a sword spirit and her body was formed from the sword spirit's power. Even if she was cut to death, she wouldn't receive any fatal injuries. Lavender transformed into numerous light spots wrapping around the long spear and spiraled towards Zen. Soon, the light spots gathered together and Lavender materialized again. She raised the long spear and charged towards Malcolm once more. The spear was still terrifying and its power fluctuations made her opponent's heart palpitate. Lavender's attack was very fierce. Although Malcolm's strength had increased greatly, he had no choice but to stop and deal with it. This required a serious manner. Otherwise, if he was stabbed by that spear, he would still die. Malcolm once again slashed out with his blade, causing Lavender's body to be torn into pieces. But in the blink of an eye, she had returned again, completely unscathed, and continued thrusting out with her spear. Malcolm soon realized that he couldn't go on like this. His flying speed was indeed much faster than Zen's. However, this sword spirit was proving simply indestructible. The distance between him and Zen had not shortened at all due to her constant interference. What enraged Malcolm even more was that Zen and his companions were running so fast ahead of him, while Rihan, Shane and the others behind them couldn't even keep up. The further they ran, the more distance they had on him. Malcolm knew that he didn't even have someone to help him. However, he had finally found Zen. How could he be willing to give up? He also did not believe that Lavender could continue fighting like this forever. The sword spirit that was attached to Zen was, in theory, an indestructible presence. As long as Zen didn't die, she wouldn't disappear or perish. However, she was constantly being destroyed by Malcolm and she had to materialize again and again. This was rather energy-consuming. The red light emitted by the sword spirit was dimming. If the energy of the sword spirit was consumed beyond a certain extent, she would only recover after slowly nurturing herself within Zen's body. The situation now looked bleak for Zen. Esther, Fabian, Jared, and the others were also trying to think of a way to get rid of Malcolm. Running away without offering any resistance did not mean that they had given up. For them, being chased by Malcolm was also not going to be a good thing. During the chase, both sides continued to move forward. 10 miles, 100 miles, 200 miles. At this point, everyone slowly realized that something was wrong with the scene ahead of them. After they had previously entered the inner area, the surrounding scenery had slowly lost its color. But now, the surrounding landscape seemed to have disappeared. Around them there was only black ground now, while the trees, grasses, mountains, and the other things had vanished. A fog is rising. The fog is starting to form around the area, Zen suddenly said. Fog. Esther's expression suddenly changed when she heard Zen's words. Even though she had just experienced 13 cycles of reincarnation, her heart couldn't help but tighten right now. Fabian and Jared looked up, and said in unison, I don't see any fog. Yolanda said affirmatively, there is indeed fog, but it's still very thin. Oh no, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that we've entered the core area. Esther's face sank, and her body abruptly came to a stop. As they spoke, the surrounding fog thickened. Even Fabian and the others could see a layer of faint fog slowly floating up. This fog was quickly becoming thick enough to be seen. As soon as they stopped, Malcolm came over to them. At the same time, he said with a sneer, why aren't you running anymore? Chapter 637, The Fog. Esther looked at Malcolm. One after another, waves of life vitality spread out, and hundreds of flowers bloomed, forming a semicircular domain of protection for everyone within. It was only after reaching the Soul Sea realm could one have a domain of his or her own. However, Esther's cultivation method was special, allowing her to create her own, myriad flowers domain. You think you will be able to stop me with just these flowers? Malcolm snorted contemptuously. The pair of wings on his back flapped as he took a step forward in the air. A fist shot out and the floral domain was instantly destroyed. Esther's expression turned grim while a smug smile appeared on Malcolm's face. In the past, she was unbeatable, even Maurice wasn't a match for her. But now, she couldn't even withstand a single punch from Malcolm. But she didn't seem too perturbed. With a wave of her hands, more flowers bloomed to protect them. She said calmly, Malcolm, don't you feel the changes around us? Changes. He squinted his eyes and looked at the fog. Suddenly, he remembered something very important. His expression changed. This is. Just then Rihan, Shane and the other two members of the night group rushed over. Rihan shouted loudly, bad news. Malcolm, we seem to have fallen into fog. Malcolm completed Rihan's sentence. Fog was a very common sight on the Sea God continent. The weather would become foggy when winter was about to pass and spring was about to come. But here in the dark nether cave, it was different. There was only one place here that had fog, and that was the core area. Encountering the fog was equivalent to entering the core area. The reason why the Dark Nether Cave had fog was still an unsolved mystery to the numerous warriors on the Sea God continent. However, every single warrior in the Tower of Sin was grateful to the fog. The Dark Nether Cave was filled with dark nether deathlight all year round. Except for the monsters inside the cave, none of the creatures outside could fight the dark nether deathlight. No matter how powerful they were, the dark nether deathlight would turn them to pus. It was believed that the dark nether deathlight originated from the core area of the Dark Nether Cave. However, every year, for a period of time, fog would rise up from the core area. It was precisely this fog that caused the dark nether deathlight to weaken greatly, giving the warriors in the Tower of Sin an opportunity to enter the Dark Nether Cave. Without this layer of fog, no one on the Sea God continent would have ever been able to set foot in the Dark Nether Cave. Although the warriors were grateful for the fog, they were also deeply afraid of it. The fog covered the entire core area. Who knew what kind of evil existence lurked in the core area? Nobody had any knowledge of it. In the past, some attempts had been made to learn about its inhabitants. All races had once joined hands to explore the fog, but not a single one had survived. Hence, Malcolm's and Esther's fears were understandable. The core area was a forbidden place that was unpredictable. No, that can't be possible. Malcolm pulled out a piece of sheepskin from his space ring. It contained the map drawn by the ogres. We should not have stepped into the core area. This cannot be the core area. He cried in panic. Fabian and Esther also took out their respective maps. After comparing them for a few seconds, Fabian shook his head and said, "This is not the core area, but the core area has extended," finished Esther with an anxious expression. There was a very clear boundary between the outer area and inner area. Moreover, the monsters of the outer area would not enter the inner area. However, there was no such border between the inner area and the core area. Wherever the fog spread, that would become the core area. With a mysterious smile, Lavender stared at Yolanda, who looked expressionless. For some reason, Lavender had been on guard against Yolanda from the beginning to the end. She heard Fabian and Esther talking about the fog in the core area, but her expression didn't change at all. But Zen's brows were furrowed. While he was being chased by Malcolm, his space ring had become hotter and hotter. The jade butterfly in his space ring had already turned into a ball of fire. This meant that the direction that the jade butterfly was currently pointing towards was inside the fog. So, the inheritance that Immortal Mist was referring to must be in the core area. Although Zen still maintained his composure, he knew that the situation was not looking good. There must be some strange things hidden within the famed core area. The most frightening thing was that they knew nothing about the fog. It must be very dangerous in there, but Zen didn't know how to overcome this obstacle. Esther stared at Malcolm indifferently and asked, "Now, do you still want to fight?" Malcolm's expression was a bit strange. He had remained at the bottom of the Tower of Sin to cultivate and was very clear on his mission. One could even say that he was a daredevil. His mission was to kill Zen at all costs. He had to ensure that Zen would not leave the Dark Nether Cave, even if it meant sacrificing his own life for it. However, after Malcolm entered the core area, his mind had somehow changed. Truth be told, he didn't want to die. According to his plan, after getting rid of Zen, he would continue to hide at the bottom of the Tower of Sin, and in the future, he would be the sole ruler of the tower. In the Tower of Sin, war sages would also be affected by the curse of the cursed land. However, based on past experience, the curse in the Tower of Sin would not burst on the spot, but would instead last for a month. In the past, a top-level warlord was promoted to a war sage within the Tower of Sin. However, the power of the curse did not descend upon him immediately. It was only a month later that he had been killed by the curse. Malcolm believed that as long as he restricted his stay in the Tower of Sin to just about half a month and then went back to the Dark Nether Cave, he wouldn't be affected by the power of curse. As his strength increased, step by step, he would soon become a high-level war sage and then gradually, a warrior at the Soul Sea realm. In the future, he would become the real controller of the Tower of Sin, and even the Flaming Ogre's sacred place and the Dread Ogre's sacred place would have to respect him. After all, with all his strength, who would dare to take him on in the Tower of Sin? But who would have thought that he would fall into the fog while he was chasing after Zen? This had completely ruined his plan. He was quite baffled now. "No, I'll kill Zen first, then we can discuss how to leave this fog." Malcolm pointed his blade at Zen. A cold smile appeared on Esther's face. "Right now, everyone is already trapped in the fog. Let's put the disputes aside first before we leave the fog." Moreover, do you think we will let you kill Zen so easily? After devouring the fruit of Dark Sky Mage, Malcolm had indeed become very powerful. However, Esther had some trump cards up her sleeve too. If both sides used their full strength, they would definitely fight to the death. The final outcome would be hard to predict. She's right, Malcolm, let's think of a way to get out of this fog. Shane said with a hopeful expression. But in his heart, he thought, today was the unluckiest day of his life. If he had known this, he wouldn't have informed Malcolm about Zen's whereabouts earlier. He would rather be torn to pieces by the swallowing birds and azure wolves than die in this place. Malcolm took a deep breath. The fog is only a legend. No one knows what is exactly in it. I don't think we can't leave this place, he said coldly. Nobody knew much about the fog, and most of what they knew about the fog came from rumors and speculation. It was said that once somebody was trapped in the fog, it was impossible to leave it, but that might not be true. It was just some fog. Was it really enough to trap so many warriors? Let's just agree to disagree for the time being and put aside our differences. We'll talk about it after we leave the fog, Esther suggested. That's not a bad idea, Shane said with a flattering smile. Malcolm glared at Shane fiercely, causing him to immediately shut up. He then nodded, all right. Let's talk after we leave the fog. Let's go back the way we came. The path they had taken to get there was not complicated. This area was completely barren, without even a small mound of soil. It was extremely desolate. Two teams of people, one in front and the other behind, carefully made their way back. The fog had been rather thin a moment ago, but now it was as thick as milk. Everyone's vision was blocked by the blinding fog. Chapter 638, The Maze. Due to the unexpected appearance of the fog, the two sides temporarily stopped fighting and decided to escape the invasive fog first. However, they still remained a considerable distance with each other, making sure they were completely aware of the movements of their opponents. After all, they were enemies, not friends. As of the moment, Malcolm had chased them for about 30 miles persistently. However, he was certain of the fact that he had not been there for long since he entered the region surrounded by the fog, as he estimated he only traveled for about 4 or 5 miles in total. Judging by the flying speed of this particular group of warriors, they fathomed that they should be able to return in a few minutes. Everyone's hearts were seemingly troubled as they all visibly sported identical looks of apprehension. No one was certain enough to quell their doubts about whether or not they could even walk out of the fog. 5 more minutes had passed by, yet they still found themselves still stuck in the thick fog. Glancing at one another with uneasiness, they knew that with their current flying speed, they should have flown dozens of miles in that short period of time. In spite of this, the fog still appeared to have no end in sight even if they felt they were closer and closer to way out. With furrowed eyebrows, they were slightly panicking at the fact that they could not even see any sign that indicated the edge of the hazy fog. Dang it, we're done for. It's just like the rumors have said. Once we enter the fog, there will be no turning back. A worried expression was painted across Shane's features as he morosely uttered. Shut up, Malcolm berated. Although he still had the grit to maintain a false sense of calm on the surface, he could not deny the truth that he was a little alarmed and anxious by the way things were going. As a matter of fact, the ogre race was the race who happened to be the most familiar with the dark nether cave. Previously, several races had joined hands to explore and discover what lay beneath the core area of the dark nether cave. Moreover, the number of warriors that the ogre race had specifically sent out was more than that of the others. As not a single soul had returned, the ogre race suffered the most loss out of any of the races. In addition to this, the ogres were the ones who had unfalteringly prepared themselves to the best of their abilities during the exploration of the core last time. It was to the extent that every ogre warrior had made a life token, as well as established a message rune system for communication. Unfortunately, things immediately went wrong after the warriors entered the dense fog, due to the fact that all of the message runes they created were all suddenly disconnected and they were then unable to communicate with the outside world. However, strangely, their life tokens were all still intact. Since the life tokens were still intact, they were somehow relieved because it meant that they were still alive. Thus, the warriors outside had assumed that they were relatively safe after entering the fog from the start. However, after 3 days had passed, all the life tokens belonging to them had all shattered simultaneously. Without a doubt, over a dozen ogre top-level warlords all died in an instant. Astonished at what they had just discovered, they all wondered the same thing: just what was it that had caused the sudden death of these top-level warlords? Regrettably, they were all at a loss because it was a mystery that no one was able to solve. With a heavy heart, Malcolm might have had the chance to solve this mystery, but he was afraid that the price in exchange for it would probably be his life. Therefore, at this time, Malcolm was indeed extremely agitated and nervous. Nevertheless, he still strove to appear as calm as he could, for the sake of the other warriors and for his own sake. At the present, Zen, who was not far behind him, suddenly spoke up, "Stop." Upon hearing the abrupt voice, they all whirled around to look at Zen, who appeared to have noticed something. "What happened?" Fabian asked, looking at the man curiously. "Look." With his eyes trained below, Zen pointed at the ground, where there seemed to be a small mark that was almost unnoticeable. In an instant, everyone looked down at the mark and asked at the same time, "Oh, what is that?" "Just before we set out, I secretly left this mark." Now, glancing between the mark and the others in front of him with a bothered frown on his face, he paused for a while as if deep in thought before speaking up once more. "We just went back to the place where we started off." Chuckling mirthlessly, Shane addressed Zen a reply, "So it seems like we were going in circles." Confirming his statement, Zen gravely nodded and everyone's crestfallen faces gave the impression of hopelessness. "Why is this happening, then?" Fabian whined, waving his arms around petulantly. "We were obviously flying in a straight line." The warrior complained, huffing at the impossibility of the situation. With a slight smile, Zen moved closer to Fabian and promptly countered, "Are you sure we were flying in a straight line all this time?" "Yes, I am quite sure," Fabian firmly replied as he stared at Zen crossly. Shaking his head as he exasperatedly sighed, Zen tried to get his point across without sounding impertinent. "This fog is somewhat strange. But even if this was a common fog, it would not be that easy for us to keep moving forward in a straight line." "Zen, are you perhaps doubting our intelligence?" Shane asked, raising an eyebrow in challenge at the underlying implications of what Zen had just said. All around him were a group of capable and top-level warlords. With a cautious glance between Zen and Shane, they did wonder right then if the former had insinuated that a group of warlords were not clever enough to know if they were walking in a straight line or not. Did he really mean what he said? They all collectively pondered. In fact, even a small kid could tell something that obvious, so Zen's words were undoubtedly a bit confusing to understand. Sighing once again, Zen gave Shane an indifferent look before walking closer to the offended man. Once he was at arm's length, Zen reached his hand out and tore a piece of cloth from his sleeve. Nodding to the other direction, he said to Shane, "Come here." "What are you planning to do?" The man cautiously stared at Zen as he anticipated what he was about to do next. "Don't worry, I only need you to help me conduct an experiment." "I'm not going to fight with you," Zen simply said, crossing his arms against his chest. Truthfully, Shane did not want to go with him, and it was written all over his face just by the way he doubtfully looked between Malcolm and the rest of his companions. If Zen were to suddenly attack him, with the watchful presence of several others by his side, how could he resist then? However, upon observing Zen's genuine gesture, Malcolm seemed to have his mind made up as he promptly ordered, "Shane, go over to him." Seeing as he could not deliberately refuse Malcolm's command, he had no choice but to brace himself and walk up to Zen, who was patiently waiting for him. Raising the strip of cloth in his hand right in front of the hesitant man, Zen looked at Shane directly in his eyes before instructing him carefully, "Now, you don't need to fly. You don't have to use your life vitality or your other special senses. Just try to walk forward by instinct." "What is this?" Needless to say, Shane was terribly confused of what Zen was asking him to do. "Just do as I say," Zen urged him, giving him a pointed look. Distractedly turning his back to look at Malcolm, Shane gulped once he saw him staring at him with such fierceness. With no other choice, Shane sighed in defeat as he walked over to Zen, and the man instantly covered his eyes with the cloth. After blindfolding Shane, Zen then asserted, "Now, move forward." Under Zen's directive, Shane took his first step forward and hesitantly walked further. "Go, keep going." With Zen constantly urging him from behind, Shane lost his uncertainty little by little and his speed steadily increased as he rapidly strode onward. 100 feet easily became 200, which reached 300 in no time at all. Not a long moment after, he had walked over 400 feet. The young warrior was already far ahead, and his figure slowly sank into the embrace of the fog, like a stone dropping into a vast lake. "Where am I? Can I stop now?" he asked, his voice briefly cracking due to him being slightly worried of his surroundings. In reality, Shane was not the type of person to be overly courageous in the face of something he feared. Furthermore, he was currently in the dark nether cave. Who knew whether a demonic beast would suddenly jump out and swallow him in the next moment? As he was temporarily banned from using his sight, he felt his heartbeat rise erratically with the sudden realization that he was alone. Before Malcolm was about to say something as he noticed something strange, Zen stopped him. At the same time, Zen activated his life vitality to talk to Shane directly. Go on. You're very close to the finish line. Upon hearing the urgent voice, Shane quickened his pace significantly and rushed forward without hesitation. From the start of his walk until the end, everyone attentively observed Shane's movements to see if what Zen was spouting was indeed true. Loud gasps were heard from the warriors as they watched Shane walk around in a big circle before finally returning to the starting point, which was beside Zen. Once he stopped, Zen then took the cloth off Shane's face. The moment Shane opened his eyes and blinked to adjust his vision from the sudden brightness, he immediately saw everyone standing around him. Confusedly tilting his head to one side, he asked them apprehensively, You have been following me the entire time." Everyone shook their heads in denial. In fact, they had not moved even a single inch after Shane started walking. But, he started to stammer. "I was walking in a straight line just now," Shane stated in confusion, wildly looking at the other people gathered around him in dismay. They, too, were in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. "You think you were walking in a straight line, but you were not, clearly," the young man said indifferently, although his eyes were alight with passion. "The reason we can usually walk in a straight line is actually because we have something stationary and obvious that allows us to use it as a reference." Rolling his eyes at the blank expressions of the other warriors, Zen continued, "For example, if there happened to be a mountain up ahead, you can use that as your object of reference when you approach it. This way, you can maintain a straight line. But in this fog," Zen paused before lowering the volume of his voice, "all the reference objects have disappeared, as if this dense fog has become a piece of cloth covering our eyes." With a solemn tone, Zen then addressed all of them. "That is why we are walking in a perpetual circle." "So that explains it, then." "Well, how come I've never heard of it?" Fabian asked curiously, with the others behind him nodding vehemently in agreement. The young man did not bother replying as he shook his head desolately. It was true that in this chaotic sea god continent, killing was the ultimate means to survive. It was definitely not as stable and peaceful compared to the lives people led in the central region. In this forlorn place, there was no culture heritable. Therefore, in that moment, Zen could finally understand why they were ignorant of this simple principle. "What should we do now?" Biting her lower lip unconsciously, Esther turned to Zen and asked him with a hopeful expression on her face. At that instant, everyone seemed to follow her lead as they all turned to look at Zen. It was obvious by the way they all regarded him with seriousness that they all saw hope from Zen. In a situation where they did not understand what was happening around them, Zen's miraculous stunt was impressive and gave them a newfound sense of hope. "We need to continue walking," he declared. Unsheathing his long sword, Zen determinedly stood as he made a visible mark on the ground before choosing a direction to walk forward. Everyone glanced at one another and their gazes became more and more resolute. Within that short moment, it was like everyone's thoughts had been united. They placed all their hopes on Zen to get them out of the intrusive fog. In actuality, Zen did not finish what he had intended to say earlier. As a matter of fact, he did not have any object around as his reference in the first place. Eventually, the space ring located on his chest was the only thing that he relied on to give him a sense of direction. The further away Zen was from the inheritance that the immortal mist had mentioned, the ring on his chest was supposed to feel slightly colder. Similarly, the closer he was to the location of the inheritance, Zen would definitely feel a higher temperature emitting from the ring on his chest. More so, as long as the temperature inside the space ring significantly decreased, the jade butterfly located in the Sumeru space would glow with less and less flames. What this meant was that everyone was constantly distancing themselves from the core area. In this line of reasoning, it should not be difficult for them to leave the core area upon using the space ring. After all, the jade butterfly acted as a beacon for all of them. However, Zen could not deny that this fog was truly strange, making it possible for people to lose their sense of direction quite easily. Just now, upon trying to return and walk out of the fog, the temperature of the space ring had initially decreased, but it suddenly spiked up without warning some time later. All the way through, Zen observed with trepidation that the temperature was constantly changing. In conclusion, this only meant that they had not been walking in a straight line, nor had they been going in a circle just like their speculation. Instead, he realized with a start that they had moved sometimes left, sometimes right, sometimes far away, and sometimes unnervingly close. It was as if they were lost in a special space. Despite his sudden alarm at what he had just become aware of, Zen did not dare reveal the secret to the others due to the following considerations. Firstly, it was unnecessary for him to divulge it as of now, and secondly, it might even cause more panic and anxiety. At the present, everyone continued to move forward even more cautiously. It was not just Zen alone who would occasionally drop down and make some marks, but the others soon followed his example. Without them noticing, 5 minutes had passed. 10 minutes later, they still persistently walked forward. 15 minutes later, they were still going at it, to no avail. Although some of them started to feel tired and worn out, the warriors determinedly strode forward even after 2 hours had passed. With their method, it was not long before they reached the 4-hour mark. As time perpetually ticked on, everyone's heart, as well as their hope in ever finding a way out, gradually sank to the bottom. Even though they did use their own methods to leave marks on the ground, it was to their disappointment later on when they eventually found out that the marks they had left were useless as they reappeared disorderly. For example, upon discovering the first mark and expecting to see the second mark next, they all groaned inaudibly as the sixth mark popped out in front of them instead. In this fog, panic seized their very bones as there seemed to be a massive space maze around them. Chapter 639, The Mysterious Red Dot. I can't take it anymore. As everyone walked quietly, Shane suddenly let out a scream and broke the silence. In this thick fog, they felt extremely alert and sensitive. Everything around them was depressing. Shane and others were already on the verge of despair. Fabian, Jared and Esther however were still calm. After all, they had passed through the gate of samsara and cultivated a high level on their warrior spirit. On the other hand, Shane and the others hadn't entered the gate of samsara. Their warrior spirit was far from being stable enough to fight dangerous situations. They lacked confidence to face what was ahead of them, and it could be imagined how frightened they felt at the moment. If we stop and stay where we are, we'll just die here, Malcolm said indifferently. He was not in the mood to care about Shane. It's impossible for us to get out of here. We will die at this forsaken place, Shane said with a crazily despaired look on his face. Oh, you really think so? Malcolm waved his fists towards Shane. If you don't shut up, I'll send you to perdition right now. Seeing that Malcolm was really going to give a blow, Shane immediately shut his mouth. In such bad circumstances, it was indeed not a wise choice to speak such depressing words like Shane did. It could very easily break the nerves of others. At that moment, one of the top-level warlords from the Demon Knight suddenly pointed forward and shouted, "Look! What is that?" Everyone turned to look in the direction he was pointing to and saw a red dot in the distance. This strange red dot hung in the sky like a rising sun in the morning mist. The fog that surrounded them was thick enough to block everyone's sights. No one could see anything 1,000 feet away. How was the light emitted by that red dot able to penetrate through the layers of fog? Everyone could see it clearly. Zen raised his head as his eyes flickered with a bright jade green light. Even his magic vision wasn't able to look through the strange fog. However, when he activated his vision ability, the red dot became a little clearer. This light reminds me of the Dark Nether Death Light. Don't you think so? Zen inquired. Esther nodded and agreed, you're right. It's very likely that all of the Dark Nether Death Light in the Dark Nether Cave originated from this red dot shrouded in mist. Which means that after walking for so long we are not getting away from the fog. Instead, we're actually getting closer and closer to the core area. We are actually moving towards the wrong direction, the direction of the core area. As Fabian drew this conclusion, he looked extremely frightened. Everyone couldn't help but swallow hard in fear. They didn't know what was in the core area, but obviously, they would get easily killed no matter what it was. Let's move away from it. Malcolm's eyes lit up as he suggested, since we have the red dot as reference, we can move away from it and find our way out. Anyway, it won't be wrong to get away from that red dot. Malcolm's suggestion immediately received everyone's approval. According to Zen's theory, without something to guide them they had been walking in circles the whole time. But now, with the red dot as their reference object, as long as they kept moving away from it, they would eventually be able to find their way out. Suddenly their hearts were swollen with hope. The way out was just around the corner. Everyone started to get excited, except for Zen, who revealed a bitter smile. He knew it was not that easy. Zen had started the journey with his own reference object, but even so, he could feel that there was something wrong as they walked forward. There was something about that mist that surrounded them, and it was getting more difficult to get out of there. At this point, Zen decided not to say anything. Now that everyone had decided to give it a try, he had no reason to stop them. He had no other choice as well. Thus, everyone followed Malcolm and continued to move away from the red dot. Everyone felt excited after realizing they could use the red dot as a reference to find their way out. They walked as fast as they could, hoping they would soon leave the fog if they kept moving like this. Suddenly, Zen discovered that the space ring hanging on his chest was becoming hotter and hotter. Needless to say, they were now closer to the core area instead of moving away from it. As he realized what was actually going on, Shane suddenly let out an astonished cry. He pointed at the red dot in the sky and stammered, that red dot is getting bigger and bigger." When everyone raised their heads, the hopeful expressions on their faces vanished. A moment before, the red dot hanging in the sky had been just a dim dot. It had now grown to the size of a fist. This meant that they were getting closer and closer to it. "This is so weird. We have been moving in the opposite direction, then why is the distance between us and that thing getting shorter and shorter?" A top-level warlord of the night group trembled as he spoke. Esther bit her lips nervously, unable to understand what was happening around her. "There is only one explanation. There is an invisible force in this fog that is guiding us closer to the core area. Perhaps it is dragging us towards it and we can't notice it." Malcolm tried to analyze the situation rationally. At this moment, Yolanda suddenly broke her silence and said, "We won't be able to walk out of this fog." Malcolm and the others weren't aware, but Esther and Fabian were clear that Yolanda knew a lot about the dark nether cave. So they asked her, almost at the same time, what exactly happened? "Is there a way to deal with it?" Yolanda answered flatly, "Yes, there is. Why didn't you say something earlier?" Fabian opened his eyes wide in shock. They had been struggling trying to find a way out, yet Yolanda had kept quiet the whole time knowing the truth. At this moment, Fabian didn't know what he should say to this strange girl. But Yolanda then added with an expressionless face, "There is a way out, but you won't make it." "What do you mean?" Esther asked with a frown. "This fog is actually a particular formation that contains the power of the space law," Yolanda replied. "If you want to leave this fog, you need to be proficient in the third layer of the space law, but none of you have achieved this." "The third layer of the space law? Are you serious?" A bitter smile appeared on Jared's face. Among this group of cultivators, only 2 of them were proficient in the space law. One of them was Zen, and the other was Jared. Zen was now slowly learning the second layer of the space law. When he was at the genuine dragon world, he managed to achieve the first layer of the space law with the help of the obelisks. Recently, he had gathered the foundations of the second layer of the space law with the help of the talent tablet. After that, he had used his points to borrow the remaining stone tablets in the Tower of Sin for cultivation. Even so, he had only grasped about half of the second layer of the space law, and it was still a long way from fully understanding the second layer of the law. As for Jared, he was way behind Zen in his cultivation. He hadn't even completely mastered the first layer of the space law, and he had only comprehended a tiny bit of its second layer. According to Yolanda, they should be proficient in the third layer of space law if they wanted to get out of this place, but none had reached this level. Did this mean that they should try to comprehend the space law here? Who knew how long it would take to grasp the third layer of space law? By then, the fog would have dispersed and everyone would have died under the dark nether death light. "Is this the only way to get out of here?" Fabian turned to Yolanda and asked again. "Not really," Yolanda replied in the same quiet tone. Everyone was feeling annoyed with Yolanda's careless way of speaking. They all stared at her angrily, while Lavender only revealed a cold sneer. She knew Yolanda's personality and that this girl had always been like this. "What is the other way if there indeed is one? Can you just say it once and for all?" Malcolm said angrily. Yolanda, without caring that they were shouting and getting angrier by the second, slowly explained, "We have to find the array plate that controls the array. Only then will we be able to leave." "Where is the array plate?" someone asked. Yolanda shook her head. "I've never been to the dark nether cave before, and this is my first time here. I don't know how to find it. But my guess is that it's somewhere in the core area." "Well, since you've never been in here before, how do you know about these things of the dark nether cave?" Malcolm asked as he stared at Yolanda with doubtful eyes. Yolanda blinked, lowered her head staring at the floor covered in fog and said, "I won't tell you. She keeps acting like this." Someone complained. Hearing this, Malcolm almost went berserk and was about to attack Yolanda. He suppressed the anger rising in his heart, and sighed deeply. "Now let's move on and see where our fates will guide us to. If it's impossible for us to leave here, we'll head straight to the core area. If the luck is on our side, we might even get rare treasures and opportunities there." Nobody said a word. Under such circumstances they had no other choice but to follow him. Resigned to their bad luck, they felt calmer and ready to face all kinds of situations ahead. This was the only thing they could do. If they were to end their lives in this place, they could do nothing but give their best shot at fighting it. The red dot hanging in the sky had now grown to the size of a plate. They began to feel the power of the dark nether death light growing stronger. Even though the thick fog still surrounded them, the dark nether death light was able to penetrate through it. It was a life or death situation. The ultimate test was to defend their lives from the deadly light. Chapter 640, A Mummy. Those rumors were not completely wrong. The dark nether death light had indeed come from the core area. To be exact, it was being emitted by the red dot. As the fog rose and covered it, the dark nether death light in the dark nether cave was becoming weaker, which was why many creatures in the Tower of Sin had enjoyed the occasional chance to enter the cave. But now, as the group slowly approached that red dot, the dark nether death light became brighter, and it posed an even greater threat to everyone on the journey to the core. Thanks to the thick fog, they could still manage to resist the dark nether death light at first. But as they drew closer to the red dot, the power of the dark nether death light was becoming stronger. How would they be able to withstand it when they finally reached it? When this question entered their minds unbidden, everyone began to hesitate again, and their pace decreased. Previously, they had thought that, no risk, no reward. They had hoped that if they shook off all of their worries and kept moving forward towards the core, there might be an opportunity which might present itself to get them out of there. But now, they knew without a doubt that they were heading down a path of no return. No one knew what awaited them, whether there were some extremely powerful beasts or monsters waiting for them in the core or not, but they all knew with certainty that just the dark nether death light alone was enough to claim their lives. "I'll stop here. If I go any further, I will definitely die. The dark nether death light alone is powerful enough to kill me." Shane crumpled down to the ground in a pitiful heap. Fear had gnawed at his fragile courage. The rest also stopped. Although Shane was a little timid, what he had said was right. No one present could resist the dark nether death light. At this point, Yolanda glanced at Shane. Perhaps she too was exhausted, so she gently lifted up the hem of her dress and sat down beside Zen. She muttered, "It's the same whether we keep walking or not." "What do you mean?" Malcolm asked, confused. Yolanda wrapped her arms around her knees and said lightly, "You will know in a little while." Malcolm was already used to Yolanda's strange manner and he stopped asking. They had traveled for half a day, so they decided to rest here for the time being. Esther retrieved a water bottle from her space ring and raised her head to drink. Everyone else also took the opportunity to get some rest. The danger-fraught journey had taken its toll on their bodies and minds. However, not long after they had sat down to take a break, Fabian pointed at the horizon and said in a trembling voice, that red dot. It seems to have grown bigger." Everyone looked up with fear and suspicion written on their tired faces. Indeed, even though they had stopped, the red dot had still grown larger. What is going on?" Shane cradled his head in his hands, his face full of despair. Thinking of what Yolanda had just said, Malcolm glared at her and said coldly, "You knew about it from the beginning." Yolanda nodded and said seriously, "Yes. Even if we don't move, we will still be dragged near to the red dot by the space law." Only then did everyone understand why the red dot had become larger to them. This fog was like a gigantic trap made of quicksand. It had sucked them closer to oblivion. Now that they had stepped into the trap, they would not be able to escape. No matter how hard they struggled, it was utterly useless. Worse, the more they struggled, the faster they would fall into the mire of death. This bleak realization lowered everyone's spirits and scraped the very bottom of their supply of courage. Their frustrations were ready to reach boiling point. Noticing Yolanda's calm face, Malcolm suddenly raised his eyebrows. Why aren't you afraid?" With a cold voice, Lavender said, "Of course she's not afraid." "Why? Does she have some other way to keep herself safe?" Malcolm asked again, his voice rising in pitch. Lavender didn't bother to answer Malcolm's question. How could she explain that the Yolanda which they saw was just one of her incarnations? It was only one of a million separate bodies which Yolanda controlled. Even if the current incarnation died, it would only be a minor loss to her. After they had rested for some time, Esther rose to her feet and said, "Okay, let's continue on our way." Everyone continued moving forward in a drudging silence. Not long after they had set off again, they encountered something that they had not yet seen in the dense fog before. There were white objects scattered about the ground which they walked over. When they got closer, they saw that these were actually bones. The bones were scattered all around them in all directions. It was a massive necropolis. "Those are human bones," Fabian screamed, his voice shrill by fear. Jared bent down and reached out his hand to pick one up. However, just as his fingers touched the bone, it immediately turned into a cloud of dust and disintegrated into the air. "How many years have they been here? They actually turn into dust at just a gentle touch," Jared said as he shook his head in disbelief. As they continued to advance, more and more bones were seen lying on the ground, scattered about like a child's toys. The road in front of them was no longer flat, and before them a crater emerged from the fog. It was a deep hole in the ground ahead of them. Right at this moment, Yolanda's eyes began glistering in a disquieting way. Then, she placed her slender index finger on her lips. It was a sign to remind others to keep quiet. Although Yolanda had always appeared strange and fey in the other warriors' eyes, she knew the dark nether cave better than anyone else. When she signaled to everyone to keep quiet, all the others immediately became silent and reached high alert. They looked at her carefully, trying to figure out what she would do next. There was no expression on her face as she continued to walk towards the center of the crater filled with white bones. While she was walking, the bones turned into dust under her wooden clogs and the dust sifted down like a powdery rain on the ground. This crater was a huge grave, filled with countless bones half buried in the soil. Who knew how many bodies, how many bones, were buried there? There were even more bones protruding from the bottom of the crater. The bones were piled up into a small mountain roughly a few dozen feet high. Treading lightly on her wooden clogs, Yolanda carefully walked to the hill formed by so many bones. Everyone around became even more nervous. Who knew what kind of demonic beast was hidden inside this hill of bones? After all, they were now in the core area. Moreover, they had traveled for so long that this was probably the very center of the core area. It wouldn't be strange if an extremely powerful demonic beast suddenly appeared here. Their nerves were raw from abuse and they fully expected to be stormed by ferocious demonic beasts. Right at this dreaded moment, Yolanda took a deep breath, and suddenly activated the power of the wind law. She blew at the hill of bones in front of her. It was just a simple blown-out breath, but as it contained the power of the wind law, the air coming out from her mouth immediately turned into a strong gust which roared forth. Those bones had been there for such a long time that no one knew exactly how long. As the wind blew, the small hill of bones turned into dust which was further blown away by Yolanda. The entire crater, which had been full of bones, was suddenly covered in fine white dust. Yolanda's figure was already covered until it became obscured within the dust. No one could see her. After a long while, the dust finally settled down, and Yolanda's figure appeared again. Everyone then saw a corpse in front of her. It was a mummy. This mummy sat cross-legged, maintaining a posture showing that he was in the process of cultivation. Unlike the other bones, this mummy was still in perfect condition, even after so many years. One could even distinguish its features. Soon, a shocking scene unfolded. Yolanda reached out her arms and actually embraced the mummy. While holding the mummy in her arms, Yolanda softly said, "I've finally found you." "What is she doing?" Zen asked in horror while staring at Yolanda. Lavender looked dispassionately at her and said, "If I'm not mistaken, that's the leader of your human's true sun world and also Yolanda's brother." "So, Yolanda's brother died here." Zen nodded his head with sudden insight. Hearing the conversation between Lavender and Zen, Malcolm's and Esther's gazes flickered. Someone at the level of the leader of a world was a notion too distant for them to fully grasp. Even the big shots of the upper world would never notice the sea god continent. However, since this mummy was a world lord and he died here, everyone wondered what kind of treasure he had left with him at this place. It could be beyond their wildest imaginings. Thinking of this, the eyes of Malcolm and those of several others with him became greedy. They knew it would be very difficult for them to leave this place. However, as the saying went, man proposes, God disposes. If they could somehow manage to successfully leave this place and they missed such a good opportunity, they would regret it for the rest of their lives. Thinking of this, Malcolm took a step forward and rushed towards the bottom of the crater. At this point, Yolanda took a bracelet off from the mummy's wrist. There was a golden skylark that hung at the end of the bracelet. A space bracelet. Weapon refiners could create Sumeru space storage items in many forms. It could be a ring or a bracelet. Malcolm's eyes flashed with excitement at the sight of the space bracelet. Just as he was about to reach out his hand to grab it, Yolanda turned her head and warned him, "If you ever want to walk out of this fog, I'd advise you to keep your hands away from this." Then all of the other warriors also walked down into the crater. Since Malcolm seemed about to attack, Esther and the rest were on their guard. After all, Yolanda belonged to the human race. When they heard Yolanda's words, their eyes widened. Malcolm asked in a deep voice, "You mean, you have a way to get out of this fog?" Yolanda didn't respond. Instead, she put the bracelet carefully away, still quite expressionless. Then she took out a yellow talisman from her own space ring. She gently placed it on the mummy's chest. With a light touch, the mummy suddenly opened its eyes.